My son's wife sent a text message that read, "We are so grateful for everything you have done for us, but Lucy wants Thanksgiving to be just family this year." I paused for a long, quiet moment before replying with a single word. Understood. That week, I quietly made 3 crucial decisions that no one saw coming. What I chose to stop doing would change everything, and they had absolutely no idea what was about to unfold. They would soon regret their definition of the word family. My name is Tobias Jenkins. I am 69 years old, and for years I played the part of a quiet, retired widower living on a fixed pension. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to entitled people who mistook your silent kindness for weakness. It was a crisp Tuesday morning in late November, just 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. I was sitting at my worn oak dining table, the exact same table where my late wife Camille and I used to share our morning coffee and read the newspaper together. The house was quiet, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. In my weathered hands, I held a freshly written cashier's check for $5,000. I had carefully written Aaron and Megan Jenkins on the pay to the order line. I knew my son Aaron was supposedly going through a rough patch with his new tech startup. He was always talking big, playing the highly successful entrepreneur in front of his wife's family. But a father always knows when his son is secretly drowning in debt. I wanted to help them have a beautiful holiday without the stress of unpaid bills. I wanted to take the pressure off his shoulders. I had even gone out and bought a new wool suit for the occasion, eager to sit around the large dining table, carve the turkey, and watch my son smile. Then my phone chimed, cutting through the silence of the room. It was a text message from Megan, my daughter-in-law. I put on my reading glasses and opened the message, fully expecting a cheerful confirmation of our holiday dinner plans, or maybe a request for me to bring my famous sweet potato pie. Instead, the words glowing on the screen felt like a physical, brutal blow to the chest. "Tobias, we are so grateful for everything you have done for us, but Lucy really wants Thanksgiving to be just family this year. We hope you understand. Have a nice holiday." I stared at the glowing screen for what felt like an eternity. Just family. The words echoed mockingly in the empty house. I was Aaron's biological father. I was the man who raised him, who carried him on my shoulders, who paid for his college. Yet to Megan and her elitist mother Lucy, I was nothing but an outsider. I was just a poor, elderly black man who simply did not fit into their pristine, picture-perfect, upper-class, white Thanksgiving aesthetic. The sheer ungrateful audacity of it left me completely breathless. A deep, cold sense of betrayal washed over me entirely, replacing the paternal warmth I had felt just moments prior. I looked down at the $5,000 check resting in my hands. The crisp paper felt incredibly heavy, almost laughing at my foolish generosity. I slowly and deliberately tore the check right down the middle, and then I tore it again and again until it was nothing but useless confetti scattered across the wooden table. I looked up at the stone mantel where a beautifully framed photograph of my lovely Camille rested. Her warm, intelligent eyes seemed to be looking right back at me through the glass. Before she passed away 5 years ago, I held her fragile hand in the hospital room and made a solemn vow. I promised her I would always look out for our boy Aaron. I promised I would make sure he was taken care of and guided through life. I had kept that promise faithfully and silently, sometimes to my own severe detriment. But looking at Camille's gentle smile now, I remembered another important piece of advice she used to tell me. She used to hold my face and say, "Tobias, do not let your endless love for that boy make you blind to his blatant disrespect." Instead of breaking down in tears, instead of calling them on the phone to beg for a seat at my own son's dining table, I felt a strange and overwhelming sense of absolute clarity. The fog of parental obligation lifted. I stood up and walked over to my home office. I did not live in a sprawling mansion. I drove an incredibly reliable 8-year-old sedan and wore comfortable clothes I bought on clearance. Aaron and Megan truly believed I was barely scraping by on a meager pension and a modest Social Security check. They honestly thought I was a financial burden just waiting to happen. They had absolutely no idea who I really was or what I had built. I opened my heavy laptop and typed in a highly secure web address. The dark screen prompted me for a dual authentication code and a complex biometric password. A brief moment later, I was logged directly into the executive financial portal of Oakland Holdings, LLC. To the ruthless corporate world, Oakland Holdings was a massive logistics and commercial warehousing empire worth tens of millions of dollars. To Aaron and Megan, it was just some faceless corporate landlord and distant investment firm. But the reality was that I was Oakland Holdings. I built that massive empire from a single rusty delivery truck over 40 years ago, surviving brutal discrimination and endless corporate battles. When I finally sold my majority shares, I established a private trust to manage my immense wealth silently and anonymously. I wanted Aaron to build his own legacy without relying on my fortune. I clicked on the Asset Management tab and scrolled through the current financial ledgers. The screen illuminated the dark room, casting a stark glow on the miserable truth of my son's fake lifestyle. Aaron loved to play the part of a self-made millionaire in front of Megan and her incredibly snobby mother Lucy. They lived in a sprawling $2 million estate in the upscale suburbs. They drove imported luxury cars and took lavish vacations to exclusive resorts. But the undeniable truth staring back at me on the screen was that Aaron was completely and utterly broke. For the past 3 years, I had been the invisible bloodline keeping their pathetic fantasy alive. I quietly routed funds through anonymous shell companies to pay their massive mortgage. I acted as the silent angel investor for Aaron's failing startup, continuously pumping hundreds of thousands of dollars into a sinking ship just to save his fragile pride. I had given them the world while they treated me like garbage on their expensive shoes. I picked up my cell phone from the desk and looked at Megan's insulting text message one last time. Just family. My calloused fingers hovered over the digital keyboard. I did not write an emotional, angry paragraph demanding respect. I did not express my profound hurt or demand any sort of lengthy explanation for their cruelty. I simply typed one single word, understood, and I hit the send button. Then I turned my absolute attention back to the Oakland Holdings financial portal. It was finally time to show them what real financial independence actually looked like. I navigated directly to the automotive lease division of my portfolio. Aaron and Megan proudly drove a pristine white Mercedes-Benz SUV and a sleek black Porsche. They foolishly thought Aaron's highly successful company was covering the expensive corporate leases as a business write-off. In reality, my private trust was automatically clearing the $3,000 monthly payments without fail. I moved the computer cursor over the active auto-pay schedule. With a single calm and deliberate click of the mouse, I completely canceled the automatic payments for both luxury vehicles. But I did not stop there. I manually flagged both of their accounts as severely delinquent, immediately authorizing aggressive repossession for non-payment. I closed the laptop with a satisfying click and leaned back heavily into my worn leather office chair. I reached down into the bottom drawer of my heavy wooden desk and pulled out a premium Cuban cigar, one I had been saving for a very special occasion. I carefully snipped the end, struck a long wooden match, and took a slow, deep draw. The rich, heavy smoke filled the quiet room, swirling upward toward the ceiling. I rested my hand on the smooth surface of the desk, tapping my fingers in a slow and deliberate rhythm. The financial countdown had officially begun. They wanted a holiday without my presence. They were about to get an entire lifetime without my silent protection. The very next morning, the consequences of my single click manifested in the most spectacular way possible. Megan was stepping out of the exclusive Serenity Day Spa located in the most expensive commercial district in the city. She was accompanied by 3 of her equally insufferable friends, all carrying designer bags and sipping iced lattes. They were likely discussing their extravagant Thanksgiving plans, the same pristine family gathering I had just been uninvited from. As the heavy glass doors slid open, Megan stopped dead in her tracks. Her iced latte slipped from her manicured hand, shattering and spilling across the pristine pavement. There, right in front of the luxury boutiques, a heavy-duty tow truck was lifting her prized black Porsche Cayenne off the ground. The bright yellow strobe lights of the truck flashed brightly, mocking her perfect morning. Megan sprinted across the sidewalk, her designer heels clicking frantically against the concrete. She started screaming at the burly man in the neon vest who was securing the rear wheels. She demanded he put her car down immediately, loudly claiming she was the wife of a wildly successful tech CEO and threatening to sue him into oblivion. The repo man barely glanced at her. He calmly pulled a thick clipboard from his jacket and handed her a bright pink carbon copy. He loudly announced right in front of her stunned friends and passing pedestrians that the vehicle was 3 full months behind on lease payments and the repossession order was authorized directly by the financing company. Megan snatched the paper, her face turning a deep shade of crimson. Her friends exchanged knowing sideways glances, trying desperately to hide their malicious smirks behind their oversized sunglasses. In their ruthless social circle, financial failure was the ultimate cardinal sin. Megan frantically pulled out her phone, dialing Aaron with shaking hands, while the tow truck roared to life and drove away with her beloved status symbol, leaving her stranded on the sidewalk. I was standing in my small backyard, watering my tomato plants, when my phone began to vibrate wildly in my pocket. I looked at the screen and saw Aaron calling. I let it ring 4 times, letting his panic stew before I slowly swiped to answer. I made sure my voice sounded frail and tired, exactly how he expected a helpless pensioner to sound. "Hello, son," I answered softly. Aaron was breathing heavily, his voice a frantic, high-pitched mess. "Dad, I need a massive favor right now. We have a ridiculous situation with the bank. A clerical error messed up the auto pay for Megan's car, and some idiot at the leasing company ordered a tow. It is completely absurd, but they actually took the Porsche from the spa. I need you to wire me $2,000 to cover the impound fees and clear the system glitch until my company accounts unlock tomorrow morning." He lied so smoothly and effortlessly. He had spent his entire adult life desperately trying to buy his way into Megan and her mother Lucy's white elitist circles. Aaron was deeply ashamed of our working-class roots. He wanted to belong to their exclusive country club world so badly that he constructed an elaborate fantasy portraying himself as a Silicon Valley genius. He never told them that his tech startup was bleeding cash, or that his father, the man they constantly looked down upon, was secretly funding their entire existence. He needed to keep up appearances at all costs to maintain his fake throne. I let out a long, raspy cough, playing my part flawlessly. "Aaron, I am so sorry," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I just paid for my blood pressure medication this morning. The pharmacy raised the prices again, and I had to use the last of my monthly pension just to cover my groceries for the week. I do not have a single dollar to spare right now." There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. I could practically hear his brain short-circuiting in real time. "Dad, you have to have something," he pleaded, the polished CEO facade cracking instantly. "Check your savings. Call the bank. I cannot let Megan go without her car. Lucy is coming over this afternoon to plan the Thanksgiving menu, and if she finds out the car got repossessed, she will never let me hear the end of it. She already thinks I am not good enough. Please, Dad." I kept my tone soft and apologetic, but internally I felt absolutely nothing for him. "Son, I wish I could help you, but my pockets are completely empty. Maybe you can use some of that big tech money you always brag about to your mother-in-law. You are a smart businessman, Aaron. I am sure you will figure out this little clerical error quickly." I hung up the phone and gently placed it back in my pocket. I picked up my watering can and went back to my tomatoes. For years, I had been the magical safety net, catching him every single time he recklessly jumped. Now the net was gone, and gravity was finally taking over. Across town, Aaron was standing at the greasy counter of the city impound lot, sweating profusely through his expensive tailored shirt. The stark contrast between his designer clothes and the dirty bulletproof glass of the towing facility was almost poetic. Megan was pacing right behind him, her arms crossed furiously, glaring daggers into the back of his head. The gruff clerk behind the glass slid the credit card machine forward. The total was $2,400, including severe late fees and towing charges. Aaron pulled out his shiny platinum credit card, a card he frequently used to impress waiters and valets. He swiped it with forced confidence, trying to look completely unbothered for his seething wife. The machine beeped a harsh, loud tone. Declined. Aaron swallowed hard, forcing a nervous laugh. He told the clerk it was a strict fraud protection trigger and quickly pulled out a second card. He swiped it again. Declined again. He reached for a third card, his final personal emergency line of credit, with a rapidly shaking hand. The machine beeped its undeniable rejection one more time. Maxed out. The clerk looked at him with absolute boredom and told him to step aside if he could not pay the bill because there was a line forming behind him. Megan stepped forward, her eyes blazing with a terrifying mixture of public humiliation and sheer rage. She had just endured the ultimate embarrassment in front of her wealthy friends, and now her husband could not even afford to get her car out of a filthy impound lot. Aaron tried to reach for her arm to calm her down, but she violently slapped his hand away. She did not care about who was watching or listening anymore. She screamed at him, demanding to know where the money from his supposedly booming company was going. She yelled that her mother Lucy was absolutely right about him all along, calling him a complete fraud who was drowning them in debt. Aaron stood there entirely speechless, his carefully crafted world of lies unraveling in the middle of a dirty parking lot. The brilliant tech founder was suddenly reduced to a broke liar who could not even afford a basic tow fee. The absolute worst part for Aaron was the creeping realization that the impenetrable safety net he always relied on, the foolish old man he had so easily dismissed from his holiday table, was suddenly and inexplicably broken. The internal war between the happy couple had officially ignited, and this was merely the opening battle. 2 days after the chaotic incident at the city impound lot, I decided to visit the local mid-tier supermarket to pick up a few things for my own quiet holiday dinner. The store was bustling with frantic holiday shoppers pushing overflowing metal carts down the brightly lit aisles. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed quietly, blending with the holiday music playing softly from the ceiling speakers. I navigated my small plastic shopping basket toward the frozen meat section. I had invited an old Army veteran buddy over for Thanksgiving, and we only needed a modest meal to share between two old friends. I reached deep into the freezer bin and pulled out a small discounted frozen turkey. It was simple, practical, and exactly what I needed for a peaceful evening. As I was inspecting the yellow clearance sticker on the plastic wrapping, I heard the sharp, unmistakable clatter of heavy designer heels approaching rapidly from behind. I did not even need to turn around to know exactly who was walking down the aisle. The suffocating and overpowering scent of expensive floral perfume hit my nose a full second before the shrill, arrogant voice echoed through the grocery store. "Tobias, what an absolute surprise to see you shopping here." I slowly turned around and found myself standing face to face with Megan and her mother, Lucy. Lucy was a woman who wore her perceived social superiority like a heavy protective winter coat. She was draped in an oversized beige cashmere sweater and adorned with thick, chunky gold jewelry, looking entirely out of place and ridiculous in a regular neighborhood grocery store. Megan stood slightly behind her, gripping the red plastic handle of her empty shopping cart so tightly that her knuckles were turning white. Megan looked absolutely exhausted, her eyes darting around the store nervously, clearly still reeling from the humiliating public loss of her luxury vehicle. But Lucy was absolutely radiant, feeding off the frantic, chaotic energy of the holiday season and her own deeply inflated sense of self-importance. She looked me up and down, her judgmental eyes lingering with blatant, visible disgust on my faded brown corduroy jacket and the cheap frozen bird resting at the bottom of my basket. "Is that what you are having for your Thanksgiving dinner?" Lucy asked, her voice dripping with venomous fake pity. "A frozen discount turkey. Oh, Tobias, that is just terribly sad. You really should let Aaron buy you a proper hot meal so you do not have to eat like this." I offered her a polite, measured smile, keeping my posture completely relaxed and entirely unbothered by her blatant disrespect. "It is just me and an old friend this year, Lucy," I replied smoothly. "We do not need much to be thankful for. We appreciate the simple things in life." Lucy let out a dry, condescending laugh that sounded exactly like scraping metal against concrete. She stepped a little closer, deliberately invading my personal space to ensure I felt the full, heavy weight of her arrogant presence. "Well, I suppose simple things are perfectly fine for simple people," she said while casually adjusting her expensive silk scarf. "But our family requires a certain standard. You know, Aaron just pre-ordered a stunning free-range heritage organic turkey for our dinner. It cost him $300, but he insisted. He told me he wanted only the absolute best for his wife and his mother-in-law. He said he wanted a flawless, elegant evening in that beautiful $2 million mansion of theirs. I am sure you understand why we needed to keep the guest list so exclusive this year, Tobias. An upscale evening like that requires a very specific, refined aesthetic. You simply would not be comfortable in that kind of high-class environment with us." I looked directly at Megan, who was staring intently at the linoleum floor, completely unable to meet my calm gaze. She knew Aaron did not have $300 to his name. She knew her husband was a total fraud, currently drowning in massive consumer debt, but she was far too terrified to shatter her mother's grand, ridiculous illusion. Lucy thrived on this deeply toxic classism. She looked down on me not just because she thought I was a poor retired pensioner living on scraps, but because she harbored deep-seated racial prejudices she poorly masked with passive-aggressive elitism. She honestly believed a black man in a worn-out jacket had absolutely no place sitting at a custom mahogany dining table in a private gated community. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my honor or call out their ridiculous, pathetic charade. I simply nodded with the utmost grace of a true, seasoned gentleman. You are absolutely right, Lucy, I said, my voice steady and completely warm. Aaron has always had an undeniable, desperate taste for the finer things in life. He loves to impress the people he deeply admires. I am sure your exclusive family dinner in that magnificent house will be exactly what you all deserve. I hope you enjoy every single bite of that $300 bird. Lucy beamed brightly, her massive ego fully inflated by my apparent total submission to her social hierarchy. Thank you, Tobias, she smirked, turning her nose up at the frozen turkey in my basket one last time. Enjoy your little frozen dinner. Try not to overcook it. She turned on her expensive heels and marched triumphantly down the aisle with Megan trailing silently behind her like a frightened, obedient shadow. I watched them walk away, my polite smile slowly fading into a hard, calculated, deeply serious stare. They were absolutely drunk on a massive illusion of wealth, an illusion I had entirely and secretly funded for years. Lucy was bragging about a grand mansion and a lavish lifestyle, completely and utterly unaware that she was openly mocking the very man who owned the actual ground she was walking on. I paid for my modest groceries with cash and walked out through the sliding glass doors into the crisp, freezing autumn air. The parking lot was packed with holiday shoppers, but I found my reliable 8-year-old sedan easily. I unlocked the trunk and placed the frozen turkey inside next to my emergency toolkit. As I slammed the heavy trunk shut, the frail elderly pensioner facade instantly dropped away. I stood up straight, my shoulders broad and my jaw firmly set. I pulled my secure smartphone from my inner jacket pocket and quickly scrolled through my encrypted contacts list. I bypassed Aaron and Megan completely and dialed the direct emergency line for the senior property manager at Oakland Holdings LLC. The phone rang only twice before a crisp professional voice answered the line. Good afternoon, Mr. Jenkins. How can I assist you today, sir? I need a full immediate status update on the residential lease for the property located at Elmwood Estate, I said, my voice carrying the undeniable heavy authority of a corporate founder. There was a brief silence as the manager typed rapidly on his mechanical keyboard. Sir, the current tenants at that address, Aaron and Megan Jenkins, are currently in severe violation of their lease agreement. The monthly rent is 2 full weeks past due. They have completely ignored our automated payment reminders and our warning emails. A cold, deeply satisfied smile crept across my face. Aaron had taken his critical rent money, the money he desperately scrounged together by maxing out his last credit cards, and blew it on a $300 organic turkey just to appease his awful demanding mother-in-law. He prioritized Lucy's elitist fake aesthetic over his own basic survival and shelter. He chose to look rich rather than actually secure his living situation. Initiate the formal eviction protocol immediately, I commanded. Draft a standard 30-day notice to vacate the premises for severe breach of contract and failure to pay. Understood, Mr. Jenkins, the manager replied without a single moment of hesitation. Shall I mail the legal notice to their primary mailbox, sir? No, I said, my tone dropping to an icy, dangerous whisper. I want this handled visibly and undeniably. Send a direct legal courier to the property today. I want the formal eviction notice taped directly to the exact center of their custom mahogany front door. Make sure it is printed on bright yellow legal paper. I want it to be the very first thing they see when they pull into their expensive driveway. Consider it done immediately, sir, the manager confirmed before disconnecting the line. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and looked back toward the large grocery store where Lucy and Megan were likely still filling their shopping cart with incredibly expensive gourmet items they absolutely could not afford. They wanted to publicly humiliate me over a frozen turkey and a modest lifestyle. I was going to legally and ruthlessly take the very roof from over their heads. I opened the driver door, started my quiet engine, and drove away from the supermarket feeling a profound, overwhelming sense of absolute control. The bright yellow legal paper clashed violently against the custom mahogany front door of the Elmwood Estate. It was impossible to miss. Aaron must have seen it the very moment he pulled into his expansive paved driveway. I knew he would panic. I knew he would desperately try to hide it before Megan or Lucy returned from their arrogant shopping trip. And I knew exactly where he would go when he realized he had absolutely no way to fix this nightmare. Less than 2 hours after I made that phone call from the grocery store parking lot, a frantic, aggressive pounding shook the front door of my modest wooden house. The heavy thuds vibrated through the floorboards. I was sitting in my worn armchair reading a paperback novel, completely unbothered. I marked my page, set the book down, and slowly walked to the foyer. I unlatched the deadbolt and swung the door open. Aaron stood on my small porch looking like a man who had just seen a ghost. His designer tie was pulled loose and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the freezing autumn wind. He pushed past me without waiting for an invitation, pacing my narrow living room like a trapped animal. "Dad, you will not believe the absolute nightmare I am dealing with," he shouted, throwing his hands in the air. "This heartless predatory corporation, Oakland Holdings, just slapped a 30-day eviction notice on my front door, a bright yellow piece of paper right where anyone on the street could see it. They are ruthless monsters. They have zero human decency." I calmly walked into my small kitchen and began boiling water for tea. I pulled 2 ceramic mugs from the cupboard, moving with the slow, deliberate pace of a tired old man. I let him vent his manufactured outrage. Aaron paced back and forth, his voice echoing off the thin walls. He cursed the property managers, calling them greedy vultures who did not understand the struggles of a modern entrepreneur. "But it is not just the house, Dad," he continued, running, a shaking hand over his face. "My business is in serious trouble. My primary angel investor completely vanished. They pulled their funding this morning without a single word of explanation. One minute I am on the verge of a multi-million-dollar buyout, and the next my accounts are totally frozen. These billionaire investors play games with people's lives. They do not care about innovation or hard work." I poured the hot water over the tea bags, watching the dark amber liquid swirl in the mugs. I kept my expression entirely blank, hiding the bitter irony of his words. Aaron genuinely believed his tech startup was a revolutionary idea. He pitched it as an elite networking app for high-net-worth individuals. But the reality was far more pathetic. I was that mysterious angel investor. 2 years ago, I set up a blind trust through a proxy firm to inject $300,000 of seed capital directly into his company. I wanted to give my son a fighting chance to build a real legacy. I quietly monitored the back-end development and the financial burn rate. I saw exactly where my money went. He did not hire top-tier software engineers or secure vital patents. The app was a broken, useless shell filled with fake user accounts. Instead, Aaron used my $300,000 to lease a lavish downtown office space, host extravagant launch parties, and buy tailored suits to impress his wealthy in-laws. He was completely delusional. He was cursing the very man who had silently funded his entire arrogant lifestyle. I carried the 2 mugs of tea into the living room and handed him one. I sat back down in my armchair, gesturing for him to take a seat on the sofa. "You are a smart boy, Aaron," I said, my voice steady and quiet. "But if your investor was pouring that much money into your company, how exactly did you fall so far behind on your residential lease? You are 2 weeks past due on a very expensive property." Aaron froze. He took a sip of the scalding tea and immediately winced. He looked around my modest living room, suddenly avoiding my gaze. He was cornered by his own web of lies. He shifted uncomfortably on the cushions, the polished CEO facade crumbling under the weight of a simple logical question. "Well, you know how cash flow issues work in the tech sector," he stammered nervously. "Capital gets tied up in vendor contracts and payroll." But then his desperation overrode his caution. His voice cracked as the truth finally spilled out of his mouth. "Actually, Dad, I had the rent money. I really did. But Lucy demanded we host Thanksgiving this year. She invited all her wealthy relatives from out of state. She expects a certain standard of luxury. Megan was stressing out, saying her family would judge us if everything was not absolutely perfect. I had to hire a private catering team. I bought that ridiculous organic turkey. I ordered cases of vintage imported wine and hired a crew to set up professional holiday decor. I spent the rent money on the party, Dad. I had to do it to keep Lucy happy. If I look like a failure, Megan will leave me." Aaron buried his face in his hands, letting out a pathetic sob. He sat there waiting for me to comfort him, waiting for his father to swoop in and offer a magical financial rescue. I just stared at him. The very last shred of hope I held for my son shattered right then and there. It evaporated into the cold air of my living room. He had literally stolen the roof over his own head just to buy expensive wine for a woman who openly despised him. He prioritized Lucy's racist, elitist approval over his own survival. I did not yell. I did not express my profound disappointment. I simply took a slow, calm sip of my tea. "Well, Aaron," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth or paternal affection, "it sounds like you bought yourself a very expensive dinner. You should probably go home and enjoy it while you still have a dining room to eat it in." After Aaron stumbled out of my front door and drove away, I did not waste a single second mourning the death of our relationship. The man who had just stood in my living room was a stranger, blinded by his own pathetic vanity. I grabbed my heavy wool coat, locked my front door, and drove my reliable sedan across town toward the industrial district. The sun had completely set, leaving the sky a dark, bruised purple. I pulled into the desolate parking lot of an abandoned strip mall. The cracked asphalt was illuminated only by the flickering amber glow of a single broken street lamp at the far edge of the lot. A nondescript, dark gray sedan was already parked in the shadows, waiting exactly as we had arranged. I pulled up alongside it and cut my engine, leaving only the parking lights on. The driver's side window of the gray car rolled down to reveal Mr. Cole, a highly discreet and ruthlessly efficient private investigator I had kept on retainer for years through Oakland Holdings. He was a man who did not ask questions or offer unsolicited opinions. He only delivered undeniable, meticulously verified facts. I reached into my coat pocket and handed him a thick envelope of cash through the open window. In return, he passed me an incredibly heavy manila folder. It was bulging with financial records, background checks, and surveillance logs. He gave me a grim, knowing nod and rolled his window back up. His sedan quietly pulled away, disappearing into the dark night without a trace. I turned on my overhead dome light and stared at the heavy file resting on my passenger seat. I knew Aaron was a liar, but what I was about to discover about Megan and her incredibly arrogant mother Lucy went far beyond simple social climbing. It was an absolute masterclass in predatory deception. I opened the folder and began flipping through the first stack of documents, which contained comprehensive credit reports and asset evaluations for Lucy and her late husband's estate. Lucy constantly paraded around town as if she were a descendant of American royalty, dripping in diamonds and boasting loudly about her exclusive country club memberships. She looked down on anyone who did not meet her ridiculous standards, especially me. The paperwork in my hands told a radically different story. Her family was drowning in massive, insurmountable debt. Their grand ancestral home had a second and third mortgage attached to it and was currently 3 months away from aggressive foreclosure. Her luxury vehicles were leased under predatory interest rates, and her precious country club membership had been permanently suspended for non-payment over a year ago. The massive diamonds she wore to every social event were cheap cubic zirconia replicas of the original stones she had secretly pawned to pay for her extravagant bar tabs. They were completely and utterly bankrupt, holding on to the absolute edge of high society by their manicured fingernails. But the most sickening revelation was hidden in the second section of Mr. Cole's meticulously compiled dossier. It detailed a verified timeline of Megan and Aaron's early courtship. I always wondered why a woman like Megan, who was so aggressively obsessed with generational wealth and status, had settled for a man like Aaron, whose startup had never generated a single dollar of actual profit. The answer was chillingly simple and deeply disturbing. 2 years before they got engaged, Megan had visited my house for a brief holiday dinner. According to digital access logs and data recovery Mr. Cole obtained, she had excused herself to use my restroom, but had actually snooped through my private home office. She had stumbled upon a quarterly bank statement I had carelessly left inside an unlocked desk drawer. It was not my primary Oakland Holdings corporate account, but a secondary private trust fund showing a liquid balance of just over $4 million. Megan took a photograph of that highly confidential document. The investigator had recovered the deleted image from her old cloud backup. She did not marry Aaron because she believed in his tech genius or because she loved him. She married him solely because she firmly believed he was the only heir to a massive hidden fortune. She looked at my foolish son and saw nothing but a winning lottery ticket. The entire upper-class facade that Lucy and Megan projected was a meticulously constructed trap designed to secure their financial survival at my direct expense. They thought they had successfully conned a rich, foolish old man and his eager, desperate son. They tolerated my presence only because they were waiting for me to die so they could inherit the millions they believed Aaron would receive. It made her text message from earlier that morning even more repulsive. She was uninviting the very man whose wealth she was plotting to steal. Taped to the inside back cover of the thick folder was a small black USB drive. A yellow sticky note attached to it simply read, "Track 4 Cafe Surveillance." I plugged the drive into the media port of my car dashboard and selected the audio file. The recording was slightly muffled at first, capturing the ambient clatter of coffee cups and background chatter at a high-end bistro. Then the sharp, unmistakable voices of Lucy and Megan cut through the background noise clearly and cleanly. They were discussing their impending financial ruin and how my money was their only viable way out. "We cannot wait for the old man to die naturally," Megan complained, her voice laced with absolute venom. "Aaron is too stupid to figure out how to access the trust accounts early, and Tobias is annoyingly healthy. I cannot keep up this fake rich housewife act while my credit cards are bouncing every single day." I heard the sound of a glass clinking as Lucy took a sip of her drink. "Then we force his hand." "Darling," she scoffed, "you are a registered nurse. We can easily manipulate Aaron into believing his father is suffering from severe early onset dementia. We start hiding Tobias's things when we visit. We gaslight him. We convince Aaron to get his father to sign a full medical and financial power of attorney. Once we have the legal authority, we toss the old man into one of those cheap state-run nursing facilities. They drug them up so much in those places he will not even know his own name. Then we legally liquidate his house and drain the trust. We can save my estate and your lifestyle in one single move, and Aaron is too weak to ever stop us." I sat completely frozen in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached with a sharp pain. This was no longer just a pathetic dispute over a Thanksgiving dinner or a delayed rent payment. This was a calculated predatory conspiracy to strip away my freedom, my dignity, and my life. They wanted to lock me in a chemical prison and drain everything I had built from the ground up. The cold winter air outside my car perfectly matched the absolute ice that formed in my veins. They looked at me and saw prey. They had officially declared war on my life. I calmly removed the USB drive from the dashboard and placed it securely in my pocket. The sadness and disappointment I felt for Aaron completely vanished, replaced by the ruthless, calculating instincts of the man who built Oakland Holdings. Now it was a fight for survival, and I was going specifically for their throats. The very next morning, my phone rang early. It was Aaron. His voice sounded remarkably cheerful and light, a stark and disturbing contrast to the frantic, sweating mess he was in my living room just 24 hours prior. He casually suggested that he and Megan wanted to take me out for a nice, quiet lunch to make up for the unfortunate Thanksgiving misunderstanding. I knew exactly what they were doing. The trap was being set just as I had heard on Mr. Cole's audio recording. They did not invite me to their $2 million estate, or to one of the high-end restaurants they typically frequented to show off their fake wealth. Instead, they asked me to meet them at a rundown diner on the very edge of town, a place with sticky, cracked vinyl booths and the overwhelming, suffocating smell of old frying oil and stale coffee. It was the exact kind of place they would never be caught dead in under normal circumstances, but they specifically chose it because they genuinely believed a poor, uneducated pensioner like me would feel comfortable and submissive there. I arrived 10 minutes early and slid into a corner booth by a dirty window. When Aaron and Megan finally walked in, they looked completely ridiculous and entirely out of place. Megan was wearing oversized designer sunglasses and carrying a leather handbag worth more than the entire diner itself. She forced a bright, sickeningly sweet smile the very moment she spotted me. They slid into the booth across from me, refusing to even look at the laminated menus. After we ordered cheap black coffee, and I asked for a bowl of watery soup, Aaron cleared his throat nervously. He reached into his sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, dense stack of legal documents. He placed them carefully on the sticky table right next to the metal salt shaker. "Dad, we have been thinking a lot about your future," Aaron began, his tone dripping with a rehearsed, utterly fake concern. "We love you so much, and we just want to make sure you are always protected." Megan nodded enthusiastically, reaching across the small table to place her manicured hand directly over mine. "We just want to help you, Tobias," she chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "We brought some standard power of attorney forms for you to sign today, just as a precaution." The psychological manipulation began immediately, and it was executed with a terrifying level of predatory precision. Megan leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a soft, pitying whisper designed to break down my confidence. "Tobias, we have been so incredibly worried about you lately. You have been so forgetful and confused. Do you remember last month when you left the stove on and almost started a terrible fire in your kitchen?" I stared at her, keeping my expression perfectly blank. I had never left the stove on. I had not even cooked at home the day she was referencing. I had been at a charity gala for the local veterans. But I remembered the hidden recording from the private investigator. I knew exactly what dark, twisted game she was playing. "And you lost your house keys twice last week," Aaron added, chiming in perfectly on cue like a trained actor. "You even called me by my brother's name." Dad, I do not have a brother. You are starting to slip, and it is entirely normal at your age to experience cognitive decline. But we simply cannot let you manage your own complex finances or critical medical decisions anymore. It is just way too dangerous for you to be alone. They were aggressively tag-teaming me, weaving a massive web of absolute lies designed to make me question my own sanity and reality. Megan squeezed my hand tighter, her sharp acrylic nails digging slightly into my skin. We spoke to a top doctor, Tobias, she lied smoothly, a renowned specialist in early-onset dementia. Based on what we told him about your recent erratic behavior, he strongly recommended that we step in immediately as your legal guardians. We already found a lovely, quiet care facility just outside the city limits. It is very affordable, and they have round-the-clock medical supervision. You would not have to worry about paying bills or cooking ever again. Aaron would have full legal control of your modest pension and your bank accounts to make sure your care is properly funded. I listened to their toxic, poisonous words, feeling a dark, cold rage burning intensely in my chest. They were casually discussing locking me away in a chemical prison, stripping me of my basic human rights, all so they could drain my bank accounts to save their own pathetic, debt-ridden lives. I remembered my beautiful Camille lying in her hospital bed, her frail hand holding mine. Do not let your endless love for that boy make you blind to his blatant disrespect, she had warned me. Her words echoed loudly in my mind, anchoring me firmly to reality. I decided to play their exact game. I let my shoulders slump forward instantly, transforming into the frail, confused old man they desperately needed me to be. I let my hands tremble slightly on the table. My memory has been a little foggy lately, I whispered, keeping my voice shaky and uncertain. I just get so confused and tired. Are you sure this is the right thing to do? Aaron smiled, a predatory, victorious gleam flashing in his eyes. It is the only thing to do, Dad. Just sign the papers right here on the dotted line. It gives me full medical and financial authority. You will be completely safe, and Megan and I will handle absolutely everything else. He slid a cheap plastic pen across the table, pointing directly at the signature line on the final page of the heavy legal document. I slowly picked up the plastic pen, my fingers deliberately trembling as I held it over the crisp white paper. I could feel Aaron and Megan holding their breath, their greedy eyes locked onto the tip of the pen like starving wolves. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully manipulated the foolish old man into signing away his entire life and whatever small fortune they believed he had left. I let the pen hover just a fraction of an inch above the signature line. The silence at the booth was deafening, broken only by the clattering of dishes from the diner kitchen and the low hum of the ceiling fan. Then, with a slow, agonizingly deliberate motion, I put the pen down on the table. I did not sign. Instead, I carefully gathered the thick stack of legal documents, tapping them on the table to align the edges, and slid them securely into my worn leather satchel. Aaron blinked his polished CEO facade, slipping for a fraction of a second. Dad, what are you doing? He asked, his voice rising in panic. You need to sign those right now. I looked up at him, the frail, confused old man persona vanishing instantly. I squared my shoulders and sat up perfectly straight, my gaze locking onto his with cold, unyielding authority. You know, Aaron, I said, my voice strong, clear, and completely unwavering. My memory might be getting a little foggy, but my mind is still sharp enough to know better than to sign a binding power of attorney in a greasy diner without proper legal counsel. I will take these documents home. I want to let the lawyer from the local Veterans Association look them over first. They offer free legal aid for seniors, and they are very thorough when it comes to investigating elder asset protection. The blood instantly drained from Megan's face. Her sickeningly sweet smile froze completely, turning into a horrific, unnatural grimace. Her eyes widened in absolute panic as she stared at the empty space on the table where the documents had just been. If a real lawyer, especially one trained in spotting elder abuse, looked at those predatory papers, their entire malicious scheme would be exposed immediately. But Tobias Megan stammered, her voice cracking with sheer desperation and fear. The doctor said we need to act fast, for your own safety. We do not have time for lawyers. I slid out of the sticky vinyl booth and stood up, towering over them both. Do not worry about my safety, Megan, I said smoothly, adjusting my coat. I am feeling much better already. Thank you for the coffee. I turned and walked out of the diner, leaving them trapped in the booth, completely paralyzed by the terrifying realization that their perfect trap had just snapped shut on their own fingers. I drove away from the greasy diner, leaving my son and his toxic wife to steep in their own rising panic. My destination was not the local Veterans Association, as I had so convincingly claimed. I merged onto the busy highway and headed straight for the gleaming financial district downtown. I parked my unassuming sedan in the underground VIP garage of a towering glass and steel skyscraper. The private express elevator shot me up to the 50th floor, where the polished steel doors opened to a sprawling, immaculate reception area. The frosted glass double doors bore the name Croft and Associates. I bypassed the front desk completely. The receptionist simply nodded with deep, immediate respect as I walked past her. I pushed open the heavy oak door at the end of the hallway, stepping into a massive corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city. Standing behind a massive black marble desk was Jonathan Croft. Jonathan was widely known in the corporate world as the Guillotine. He was a ruthless, highly strategic attorney who specialized in tearing down hostile takeover attempts and dismantling corporate adversaries with brutal surgical precision. He had been my most trusted legal counsel for over 2 decades, helping me protect Oakland holdings from predatory rivals. Jonathan did not deal in petty family law or minor domestic disputes. He dealt in absolute financial annihilation. He looked up from his paperwork, his sharp, icy blue eyes locking onto mine. He immediately noted the grim, unwavering expression on my face. He gestured toward one of the plush leather chairs across from his desk. "Tobias," he said, his voice a low, commanding baritone. "You only come to my office unannounced when someone has made a catastrophic mistake. Who are we destroying today?" I reached into my leather satchel and pulled out the thick stack of predatory power of attorney documents Aaron and Megan had just tried to force me to sign. I tossed them onto the cold marble surface of his desk. Jonathan picked them up, skimming the dense pages with lightning speed. His jaw tightened as he registered the malicious intent hidden beneath the heavy legal jargon. "They actually tried to legally declare you incompetent and grant themselves full medical and financial authority," he said, his tone laced with absolute disgust. "This is a poorly constructed amateur trap designed to strip your assets and lock you in a state-run psychiatric facility." I sat back in the leather chair, my posture completely rigid. "I want Aaron completely excised from the primary trust," I commanded, my voice steady and devoid of any hesitation. "Every single dime of the $15 million private portfolio reserved for him is to be instantly revoked. Liquidate his position entirely." Jonathan did not flinch. He simply pulled a fresh legal pad toward him and uncapped his silver fountain pen. "And where shall we redirect the $15 million, Tobias?" he asked. "Set up a permanent endowment for historically black colleges and universities," I replied without missing a single beat. "Full-ride scholarships for underprivileged minority students who actually want to build something real." Jonathan nodded, writing down the instructions with swift, precise strokes. I looked out the massive glass windows at the sprawling city below, remembering the brutal decades it took to build my empire. When I started out with just one rusty delivery truck, I had doors violently slammed in my face simply because of the color of my skin. I was denied basic business loans, laughed out of bank lobbies, and forced to work 3 times as hard as my white competitors just to earn a single seat at the table. I bled for every single dollar in that trust. I endured public humiliation and systemic racism so my son would never have to know that kind of crippling pain. But Aaron took that enormous privilege and completely squandered it. He bowed down to a family that secretly despises our heritage and treats working-class people like dirt on their expensive shoes. Lucy and Megan embody the exact arrogant, classist bigotry I fought against my entire life. I will absolutely not allow the fortune I built from nothing to finance their pathetic racist illusions of grandeur, and I will not allow my own son to use my blood and sweat to buy his way into a family that views him as nothing more than a convenient, disposable bank account. Strip him of everything, Jonathan. Leave absolutely no legal loopholes for them to contest. I want him legally and permanently severed from the Jenkins family estate." Jonathan continued, writing, his expression turning into a sharp, predatory smile. "Consider it done, Tobias. I will draft an ironclad revocation of inheritance and restructure the trust beneficiary matrix immediately. They will not be able to touch a single penny of your legacy." "But we are not just changing the will," Jonathan added, leaning forward and resting my arms on his desk. "I want a complete accounting of every single dollar my anonymous trust has pumped into their fraudulent lifestyle over the last 3 years. I want the luxury car leases, the $2 million estate rental agreements, the $300,000 startup seed capital, all of it meticulously documented. I want you to compile a master dossier, a complete financial severance package." Jonathan tapped his pen against the marble desk, his brilliant mind already assembling the legal execution. I will pull the transaction logs from the shell companies, he stated. We will print the ledger showing exactly where the money originated and how it sustained their entire fake existence. I will also include the formal eviction notice and the repossession orders to establish a clear, undeniable timeline of their financial termination. I will bind it all into a single, indisputable legal portfolio. When do you want this delivered? I stood up from the leather chair, straightening my coat. I thought about Megan and Lucy bragging about their exclusive, elegant holiday dinner. I thought about the $300 turkey bought with stolen rent money. I want it delivered on Thanksgiving Day. I instructed, my voice cold and absolute. I want it executed precisely at 6:00 in the evening, right when they are sitting down at their custom mahogany table to carve their expensive bird, surrounded by all their snobby upper-class relatives. Jonathan closed his legal pad, a look of dark, profound satisfaction settling over his sharp features. A 6:00 Thanksgiving execution, he confirmed, standing up to shake my hand. It is a bold, highly strategic move, Tobias. I will personally ensure the financial severance dossier is fully prepared and ready for deployment. They will not have a single legal avenue to fight back. I shook his hand, feeling the solid weight of justice finally aligning. I walked out of the glass office and stepped back into the private elevator. As the doors slid shut, taking me back down to the ground floor, the countdown in my head locked firmly into place. The trap they tried to set for me had failed completely. Now my own trap was primed, and the timer was set for a holiday dinner they would never, ever forget. I drove my unassuming sedan out of the underground VIP garage of the financial district, the heavy steel gates closing behind me with a loud metallic clank. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip below the towering skyscrapers, casting long, dark shadows across the busy city streets. I felt a profound sense of clarity navigating the traffic with the calm precision of a man who had just secured his own future. I was about to merge onto the interstate to head back to my quiet neighborhood when my secure smartphone suddenly vibrated violently against the fabric of my coat pocket. It was not a standard ringtone or a regular text message alert. It was a high-priority push notification from the discreet advanced security system I had installed in my modest wooden home years ago. The automated voice on the system read, "Motion detected in the primary study." I immediately pulled my car over into the empty parking lot of a closed retail store and put the transmission in park. I pulled out my phone and quickly tapped the security application, expecting to see a neighborhood stray cat that had somehow gotten onto the porch, or perhaps a false alarm triggered by the shifting autumn shadows. Instead, the high-definition infrared camera feed loaded to reveal a very familiar figure creeping through my dimly lit hallway. It was Aaron. He had used the spare emergency key I gave him years ago, a key he had not touched in over a decade until this very moment. I sat completely frozen in the driver's seat, watching my own son sneak through my house like a common, desperate burglar. He was sweating profusely, his expensive tailored suit jacket discarded somewhere off camera. His tie was completely undone, and he was breathing heavily, looking around with the frantic, paranoid energy of a cornered animal. He was tearing through my modest home, looking for hidden cash or anything of immediate value. I watched him pull open the drawers of my old wooden desk, tossing my personal letters and utility bills onto the floor with absolute disregard. He checked under the sofa cushions and rummaged through the ceramic coffee cans in the kitchen. He was desperate because the repo man had publicly taken Megan's luxury car, the rent was severely overdue, and his fake startup was completely broke. He needed untraceable cash right now to pay for the lavish Thanksgiving dinner to impress his incredibly racist mother-in-law, Lucy. Finding no stacks of money hidden in the drawers, Aaron moved swiftly into my small living room and stopped squarely in front of the vintage display case resting on the stone mantelpiece. My breath caught in my throat. Inside that reinforced glass case rested an antique gold pocket watch. It was not just a piece of jewelry. It was the only physical heirloom I possessed from my ancestry. That heavy gold watch belonged to my grandfather, a proud, resilient black man who worked the grueling cotton fields and bought that timepiece with his very first savings as a free citizen. It had survived the brutal Jim Crow era, passing from my grandfather to my father and then to me. It was a sacred symbol of our family's immense resilience, our history, and our unbreakable working-class pride. Aaron knew exactly what that watch meant. I had sat him down on my knee when he was just a little boy, holding that watch in my hand, telling him the stories of the great men who came before him. I told him it would be his one day when he proved himself worthy of carrying our family legacy. Yet on the glowing screen of my phone, I watched my son smash the delicate glass case with the heavy base of a table lamp. He did not even hesitate. He did not show a single ounce of remorse or hesitation. He reached through the shattered glass, snatched the gold pocket watch, and carelessly shoved it deep into his trouser pocket. He quickly turned on his heel and darted out the back door, leaving the shattered glass scattered across my living room floor. The emotional weight of that specific moment crashed down on me with terrifying force. It was a visceral, agonizing pain that started in my chest and radiated out to my fingertips. My own flesh and blood had officially crossed the absolute point of no return. He had transitioned from a manipulative liar to a desperate petty thief. The boy I raised, the boy I shielded from the harsh realities of a cruel world, had just sold out his own family's sacred legacy to fund a fake, arrogant holiday dinner for white elites who secretly despised his very existence. A profound wave of disgust washed over me entirely, replacing the sharp sting of heartbreak. The last tiny flickering ember of paternal forgiveness I held for him was instantly, permanently extinguished. The man on that camera was no longer my son. He was just a thief who broke into my house. I did not dial emergency services to send a patrol car to arrest him right then and there. A simple burglary charge would be far too easy for him. An immediate arrest would give him an excuse to skip the Thanksgiving dinner and play the victim for Megan and Lucy. I wanted him sitting right at the head of that custom mahogany table when his entire fraudulent world burned to the ground. Instead, I scrolled through my encrypted contacts and made a direct phone call to the county sheriff. Years ago, my corporation, Oakland Holdings, had anonymously funded the construction of the new state-of-the-art training facility for the local sheriff department. I was also a silent but major contributor to the Police Benevolent Fund. The sheriff knew exactly who Tobias Jenkins was, and he owed me a massive professional debt of gratitude. The sheriff answered the private line, immediately speaking with deep, unwavering respect. I calmly explained the situation without letting a single drop of emotion bleed into my voice. I informed him that the formal eviction order for the Elmwood estate had been officially processed by the courts, and I needed it executed with maximum visibility and absolute authority. I specifically requested that the sheriff personally serve the writ of possession, along with a full team of uniformed deputies. I told him I wanted the eviction carried out on Thanksgiving Day at exactly 5:45 in the evening. The sheriff agreed without a single moment of hesitation, assuring me that he would personally lead the eviction detail and ensure the property was vacated immediately upon his arrival. Then I gave the sheriff one more critical piece of information. I provided the exact serial number, the distinct engravings, and a highly detailed description of my grandfather's antique gold pocket watch. I asked him to immediately flag the precious item in the National Pawnshop database as high-value stolen property. Aaron was completely broke and desperately needed thousands of dollars in cash to pay his private catering team by tomorrow morning. I knew my son better than he knew himself. He would not wait to fence the watch. He would undoubtedly try to pawn it at one of the high-end luxury brokers in the city within the next few hours. I instructed the sheriff not to arrest him at the pawn shop, but to simply confiscate the stolen watch securely and document the attempted fraudulent sale for our impending legal execution. I hung up the phone and set it down on the passenger seat of my car. The pieces of the board were now perfectly and ruthlessly aligned. Aaron honestly thought he had just secured his holiday budget by stealing his own heritage. He thought he was incredibly clever, outsmarting his old, frail father. In reality, he had just handed me the final devastating nail for his own financial and social coffin. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the parking lot, heading back to my house to sweep up the broken glass. The stage was finally set for a holiday gathering that would echo in their arrogant memories for the rest of their miserable lives. Thanksgiving morning broke with a crisp, bright chill across the sprawling Elmwood estate. Inside the massive $2 million home, the atmosphere was a chaotic whirlwind of manufactured perfection and aggressive vanity. Megan was standing at the head of the custom mahogany dining table, her smartphone held high in the air as she broadcasted a live video to her hundreds of jealous followers. She wore a stunning tailored emerald dress, her hair perfectly blown out, framing a sickeningly sweet smile that did not quite reach her cold eyes. She slowly panned the high-definition camera across the absurdly lavish spread. The long table was adorned with imported crystal glassware, heavy sterling silver cutlery, and towering centerpieces of fresh autumn flowers that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. At the very center, resting on a massive silver platter, was the ridiculous $300 organic free-range heritage turkey Aaron had purchased with stolen rent money. Megan proudly narrated the scene, boasting loudly about the sheer exclusivity of their intimate holiday gathering. She made sure to explicitly highlight the 3 bottles of imported French wine resting on the side console, casually dropping the fact that each rare bottle cost upward of $1,000. Lucy hovered right behind her daughter, sipping a sparkling mimosa and waving frantically at the camera lens. Lucy chimed in to loudly proclaim that this year they decided to keep the guest list strictly to high society family members, completely cutting out any unpleasant negative energy or lower-class distractions. It was a flawless theatrical performance designed solely to generate envy from their equally superficial social circle. They paraded their stolen luxury with absolute shameless pride, entirely blind to the massive legal guillotine hanging directly over their arrogant heads. While the women laughed and celebrated their fake wealth downstairs, Aaron was securely locked inside the expansive master bathroom on the second floor. He was not celebrating. He was standing over the gleaming marble sink, gripping the cold edges so tightly his knuckles were completely bone white. He was sweating profusely right through his expensive custom-tailored silk shirt, the fine fabric clinging uncomfortably to his back. His chest heaved with shallow, panicked breaths as a wave of severe nausea washed over him. His secure smartphone lay on the marble counter, vibrating relentlessly with automated email alerts from the Oakland Holdings tenant portal. The subject lines were stark, clinical, and absolutely terrifying. Final warning, severe breach of contract, immediate legal action pending today. Aaron splashed freezing cold water onto his face, desperately trying to wash away the suffocating anxiety that was crushing his lungs. He stared at his own reflection in the gold-rimmed mirror and saw exactly what he truly was, a complete and utter fraud. The polished tech CEO persona had entirely evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, desperate boy who had stolen his own father's sacred heritage just to buy a few more hours of fake approval from people who secretly despised him. He could hear the muffled sounds of the private catering team downstairs charging him by the minute to prepare a feast he absolutely could not afford to pay for. The massive disconnect between the joyous elitist laughter echoing up the grand staircase and the rotting financial reality of his existence was driving him to the brink of a total mental collapse. Across town, the atmosphere inside my modest wooden home could not have been more different. There were no imported crystal glasses, no private chefs scrambling in the kitchen, and certainly no cameras broadcasting our meal to strangers on the internet. I had set my small, sturdy kitchen table for 2. I invited my oldest and dearest friend Marcus, a fellow military veteran who had stood by my side long before the Oakland Holdings empire ever existed. The house smelled incredibly warm and inviting, filled with the rich, comforting aroma of roasted chicken, fresh garlic, green beans, and sweet cornbread baking slowly in the oven. Marcus and I sat across from each other, sharing genuine laughter and swapping old stories from our youth. We did not need $300 birds or $1,000 bottles of wine to feel truly wealthy. We had deep, unbreakable brotherhood and the quiet, profound peace of mind that only comes from living a deeply honest life. I took a slow sip of my black coffee and casually glanced at the heavy grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. The brass hands moved with steady, mechanical precision. I felt completely relaxed, entirely untroubled by the massive storm I had personally orchestrated. I knew the exact timeline of the impending execution. I had given Aaron more than enough rope to hang himself, and he had eagerly tied the noose with his own 2 hands. The calm inside my home was the perfect counterbalance to the absolute destruction waiting for them. Back at the Elmwood estate, Aaron finally forced himself to unlock the bathroom door. He carefully dried his face, adjusted his expensive silk tie, and plastered on the fake, confident smile he had spent years perfecting. He needed to go downstairs and play the role of the generous, wealthy host for Lucy and the arriving guests. He walked slowly down the grand, sweeping staircase, his legs feeling like they were made of heavy, solid lead. Just as his foot reached the bottom step, his phone vibrated violently in his pocket with a distinct, sharp chime. He pulled it out, dreading another automated threat from the property management portal. Instead, he saw a direct text message from the high-end luxury pawnbroker downtown. The message was short, clinical, and absolutely devastating. Mr. Jenkins, the item you provided for appraisal has been officially flagged by the county sheriff department as highly valued stolen property. The pending cash advance transaction is permanently voided. Local authorities have confiscated the antique heirloom. Your profile has been flagged in the National Law Enforcement Database. Do not contact this office again. Aaron stopped breathing entirely. The polished hardwood floor seemed to tilt violently beneath his expensive leather shoes. The temporary cash advance he was desperately relying on to pay the private catering team at the end of the night was instantly wiped out. But the frozen funds were the absolute least of his problems now. The police knew about the stolen pocket watch. They had physically confiscated it. That meant they knew exactly who brought it into the shop. His own father, the man he thought was a frail, clueless pensioner, had somehow discovered the theft and reported it with terrifying speed and precision. Aaron realized with a sickening wave of absolute dread that he was no longer just dealing with an angry corporate landlord or a mountain of consumer debt. He was now an active suspect in a felony grand larceny investigation. The air in his lungs completely vanished and his vision blurred at the edges. He looked up and saw Lucy standing in the grand dining room, aggressively waving him over to carve the massive, expensive turkey. She was smiling widely, her teeth perfectly white, surrounded by her wealthy, elitist relatives who had just arrived. They were all waiting for him to play the gracious, wealthy host. Aaron was entirely trapped. He had zero money to pay the staff serving the food. He was actively being hunted by the county sheriff for stealing his family legacy. And a formal eviction execution was ticking down like a silent bomb waiting to obliterate his entire world. The absolute peak of his panic had finally arrived, and there was nowhere left for him to run. By 4:00 in the afternoon, the sprawling paved driveway of the Elmwood estate was completely packed with a fleet of imported luxury sedans and high-end sports cars. Lucy stood proudly by the grand entrance, welcoming her extended family with exaggerated hugs and loud performative kisses. They paraded into the grand foyer, draped in designer winter coats and dripping in heavy, expensive jewelry. Aunts, uncles, and wealthy cousins filled the expansive living room, carrying bottles of vintage champagne and casting judgmental eyes over every single detail of the house. Aaron was forced to play the role of the gracious host, offering crystal glasses of wine with hands that visibly shook. The social atmosphere was incredibly toxic, thick with passive-aggressive snobbery. Lucy's older brother, a retired corporate banker named Richard, patted Aaron hard on the shoulder with a patronizing smirk. He loudly asked in front of the entire room if Aaron's little computer project had finally turned a profit, or if Megan was still waiting for her husband to get a real job. The room erupted in polite but cruel laughter. Megan quickly interjected, boasting about the expensive organic turkey and the private catering staff trying desperately to redirect the conversation away from their failing finances. Aaron simply swallowed the deep humiliation, nodding tightly and excusing himself to check on the kitchen. He was entirely trapped in a nightmare, surrounded by people who openly despised his working-class roots. Drinking wine he could not afford in a house he was about to lose. Every ticking second of the grandfather clock in the hallway felt like a heavy hammer striking directly against his skull. The lead caterer had just quietly pulled him aside, demanding the final cash payment before serving the main course, knowing full well Aaron had absolutely nothing left to give. Half a block down the quiet, manicured street, I sat comfortably in the driver's seat of my reliable 8-year-old sedan. The heater was running softly, keeping the freezing autumn chill at bay. I rolled the window down just a fraction to let the rich, heavy smoke of my Cuban cigar drift out into the fading evening light. From my vantage point, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the Elmwood estate. I watched the constant stream of wealthy guests arriving in their polished luxury vehicles, handing their keys to the valet Aaron had foolishly hired on credit. I watched their arrogant silhouettes moving past the brightly lit bay windows of the grand dining room. They were drinking, laughing, and celebrating their immense social superiority. They felt completely untouchable. I took a slow, deliberate drag of my cigar, feeling the smooth warmth fill my chest. I looked at the massive stone pillars and the custom mahogany front door of that $2 million mansion. I bought that house in cash through Oakland Holdings 5 years ago. It was not purchased with old money or trust funds. It was paid for with 40 years of calloused hands, broken sleep, and relentless grinding labor. I remembered the early days of my logistics company when I had to drive the delivery trucks myself, working 20-hour shifts just to keep the lights on. I remembered sitting in sterile bank lobbies, watching white loan officers dismiss my business plans with condescending smiles simply because of the color of my skin. I had to build my empire brick by brick, fighting through systemic prejudice and corporate sabotage to amass a fortune those snobby guests could not even begin to comprehend. True wealth is not loudly displayed in emerald dresses or $300 turkeys. True wealth is absolute silent power. It is the ability to sit quietly in a dark car on a freezing Thanksgiving evening knowing you hold the total destruction of an entire fake aristocracy in the palm of your hand. I watched Lucy step out onto the front porch for a moment wrapped in an expensive fur shawl, laughing loudly with one of her wealthy sisters. She was standing on my porch. She was breathing my air. She honestly believed she had successfully isolated her pristine family from the poor black pensioner she so deeply despised. She believed she had won. I tapped the ash from my cigar out the narrow gap in the window, keeping my eyes locked on the grand estate. The sheer audacity of their entitlement was staggering. Aaron had taken the sacred legacy of my grandfather, the gold pocket watch paid for with the blood of a freed man, and traded it for a fleeting moment of approval from people who would never view him as an equal. He traded his actual birthright for a seat at a table that was about to be repossessed by the very father he betrayed. I glanced down at the glowing digital clock on my dashboard. The bright green numbers read 5:30. The meticulous planning, the silent execution, the absolute patience, it was all converging onto a single fixed point in time. I settled back against the headrest and took another long draw of my cigar, letting the quiet anticipation wash over me completely. The digital clock on my dashboard flipped silently to 5:45 in the evening, right on schedule. From the opposite end of the quiet suburban street, the heavy silence was violently shattered by the roar of powerful engines. I watched in absolute deep satisfaction as two large, heavily armored county sheriff patrol SUVs turned the corner. They did not use their audible sirens, but they flipped on their emergency tactical lights. The intense, piercing strobes of red and blue instantly illuminated the entire manicured neighborhood. The flashing lights bounced aggressively off the expensive luxury cars parked in the driveway and cast harsh, sweeping shadows across the pristine facade of the Elmwood estate. Right behind the police cruisers, a massive commercial moving truck rumbled down the street, its heavy diesel engine growling loudly as it pulled directly into Aaron and Megan's driveway, blocking in the valet-parked vehicles. Inside the mansion, the cheerful classical holiday music abruptly stopped. I saw the silhouettes in the Grand Bay windows freeze completely. The wealthy guests crowded around the glass, holding their crystal champagne flutes, looking out at the flashing police lights with absolute horror and mounting confusion. The heavy front doors of the patrol vehicles swung open, and the county sheriff stepped out, dressed in his full formal uniform, followed closely by four stern-looking armed deputies and a court-appointed eviction official holding a thick stack of bright yellow legal documents. The neighborhood instantly woke up. Front doors across the street cracked open as curious wealthy neighbors stepped out onto their porches to witness the spectacle. The grand flawless holiday dinner Lucy and Megan had meticulously orchestrated to impress their elite relatives was entirely surrounded by law enforcement. The heavy boots of the sheriff and his deputies marched purposefully up the stone walkway, heading straight for the custom mahogany front door. I put my cigar out in the ashtray, rolled up my window, and stepped out of my reliable 8-year-old sedan. The countdown had officially reached 0. The facade was completely over, and it was time to collect my property. Inside the grand dining room of the Elmwood estate, the atmosphere was thick with suffocating arrogance. The long custom mahogany table was overflowing with the absurdly expensive catered feast. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the imported French wine, and the $300 organic turkey resting on its silver platter. Lucy stood at the head of the table, holding a delicate crystal champagne flute high in the air. She tapped the side of her glass with a sterling silver spoon, demanding the absolute attention of her wealthy, sophisticated guests. The dull murmur of elitist gossip immediately fell silent. "I want to propose a toast," Lucy announced, her voice projecting with practiced theatricality. "To our beautiful family. It is so incredibly rare in this chaotic world to gather with people of our specific caliber. People who truly understand the value of high standards, pedigree, and pure, unadulterated success. She cast a glowing look toward Megan, who beamed with pride while completely ignoring Aaron, who was visibly trembling at the opposite end of the table. "We are so blessed to be surrounded only by those who truly belong here," Lucy continued, her smile widening. "To a perfect, flawless holiday." The guests raised their sparkling glasses in unison, murmuring their enthusiastic agreements. But before a single drop of champagne could touch their lips, a massive, thunderous pounding violently shook the heavy mahogany front door. It was not a polite neighborly knock. It was a heavy, aggressive series of blows that echoed like a military drum throughout the entire $2 million mansion. The delicate crystal glasses in the hands of the startled guests actually rattled from the sheer force of the impact. The cheerful holiday music playing softly from the ceiling speakers was instantly drowned out by a booming, authoritative voice shouting from the front porch. "County Sheriff Department, open the door immediately." Lucy froze completely, her champagne flute hovering awkwardly in midair. The wealthy guests exchanged terrified, bewildered glances. The pristine, flawless bubble of their high society gathering popped in a single devastating instant. Aaron stood frozen at the end of the table, his face draining of all color until he looked like a walking corpse. He knew exactly what was on the other side of that door, but his legs refused to move. The aggressive pounding resumed, shaking the hinges. Aaron opened the door. Megan hissed, her voice a sharp, venomous whisper. "Do not just stand there like a complete idiot." Aaron forced himself to walk on unsteady legs across the grand foyer. His trembling hands fumbled with the brass deadbolt. The moment the lock clicked, the heavy door was pushed open with absolute, overwhelming authority. The county sheriff stepped into the grand foyer, fully uniformed, with his hand resting casually on his utility belt. He was flanked by 4 heavily armed deputies and a stern court official holding a thick clipboard. The flashing red and blue strobe lights from the patrol vehicles outside flooded the elegant entryway, casting harsh, aggressive shadows against the expensive artwork on the walls. Aaron Jenkins, the sheriff, demanded, his deep voice carrying directly into the dining room where the elite guests stood in stunned silence. "I am Sheriff Miller. I am executing a formal court-ordered writ of possession on behalf of Oakland Holdings, LLC. This property is in severe violation of a residential lease agreement. You are hereby ordered to vacate these premises immediately." The words hit the opulent dining room like an explosive detonation. The wealthy aunts, uncles, and retired corporate bankers gasped in pure, unfiltered shock. Lucy dropped her champagne flute entirely. The expensive crystal shattered into 100 pieces against the polished hardwood floor, the sparkling wine pooling around her designer heels. Eviction. The word rippled through the crowd of snobby guests like a contagious disease. Megan pushed her way past her frozen husband, her face contorted in absolute fury and utter humiliation. "There has to be some kind of ridiculous mistake," she screamed at the sheriff, her voice echoing shrilly off the high ceilings. "My husband is the CEO of a highly successful technology firm. We own this house. We do not rent. You have the wrong address." The sheriff did not even blink. He calmly pulled the bright yellow legal document from the court official's clipboard and held it up. "Mom, public property records clearly show this estate is entirely owned by Oakland Holdings, LLC," he stated firmly. "Your husband signed a residential lease which is now 3 months delinquent. The grace period has officially expired. By order of the county judge, you have exactly 1 hour to remove your personal belongings before we physically lock down the estate." Megan whipped her head around to face Aaron, her eyes blazing with a terrifying, murderous rage. "You rent!" she shrieked, the veins in her neck bulging. "You told me you bought this house in cash. You told my mother we were equity owners. Where is the money, Aaron? Where is the multi-million-dollar startup funding?" Aaron backed away from his wife, stumbling slightly against the wall. He opened his mouth to speak, but no coherent words came out. He just stammered weakly, his hands shaking violently as he looked at the crowd of wealthy guests, who were now staring at him with absolute undisguised disgust. The brilliant, successful entrepreneur was completely exposed as a broke, desperate fraud in front of the exact people he had sacrificed his own father to impress. The room descended into pure chaotic panic as the wealthy guests began scrambling to find their coats, desperately trying to flee the humiliating scene before they were associated with a high-profile police eviction. Before Aaron could string together a single pathetic excuse, the heavy tread of work boots echoed from the front porch. A professional moving crew dressed in matching gray uniforms marched right past the armed deputies carrying heavy-duty cardboard boxes, dollies, and rolls of industrial packing tape. They moved with relentless mechanical efficiency. Two movers walked straight into the grand dining room, completely ignoring the horrified high society guests, and immediately began grabbing the expensive dining chairs, pulling them right out from under people. Another mover began rolling up the massive Persian rug in the living room, while a fourth started unplugging the massive flat-screen television from the wall. "You cannot do this!" Megan shrieked, grabbing the arm of a mover who was packing away a delicate crystal vase. "These are my personal things. You are ruining my Thanksgiving dinner." The court official stepped forward, blocking her path. "Ma'am, anything not removed by you in the next 50 minutes will be placed into a commercial storage unit at your personal expense," he stated with zero emotion. "Please step aside and let the crew do their job." The utter humiliation was absolute and entirely inescapable. The lavish imported turkey sat abandoned on the mahogany table as the movers literally began disassembling the dining set around it. Aaron finally snapped. The crushing weight of his colossal failure, the angry glares of his in-laws, and the physical dismantling of his fake life drove him into a state of sheer delusional panic. He shoved past a deputy, his face red and slick with sweat. "Stop touching my things!" Aaron roared, his voice cracking in a pathetic display of fake authority. "This is a massive corporate misunderstanding. I demand to speak to whoever is in charge of this. Where is the representative for Oakland Holdings? I know how these corporate bullies operate. I demand to speak to the owner of this property right this very second. I am not leaving this house until I speak directly to the man who did this to me." He stood in the middle of his disintegrating kingdom chest, heaving, screaming into the void, demanding an audience with the faceless billionaire he thought had ruined his life. He had absolutely no idea that the owner of Oakland Holdings was already walking through the front door. The frantic shouting in the grand foyer suddenly died down as the heavy mahogany door swung open completely. The armed deputies immediately took a respectful step back, creating a wide, clear path through the chaotic entryway. The frightened wealthy guests, who were previously scrambling for their expensive winter coats, froze in place. Aaron stood panting, his face slick with cold sweat, as a tall, imposing figure stepped over the threshold and into the bright, flashing lights of the police cruisers. It was me. But I was not the frail, helpless pensioner they had so cruelly mocked at the grocery store. I had discarded my faded brown corduroy jacket and my worn-out shoes. I was dressed in a meticulously tailored dark navy wool suit, a crisp, immaculate white shirt, and polished leather Oxford shoes that echoed with quiet authority against the hardwood floor. I carried a thick black leather briefcase in my right hand, moving with the slow, deliberate power of a man who owned absolutely everything in his path. The sheer commanding presence of my arrival sucked the remaining air out of the grand foyer. I did not look at the police officers or the moving crew who were currently disassembling the living room furniture. I kept my gaze fixed entirely on Aaron. He took a staggering step backward, his jaw dropping open as if he were staring at a ghost. The brilliant tech founder, the arrogant man who had stolen his own grandfather's gold watch to appease a racist family, was completely speechless. The entire room was silent, waiting for the billionaire representative of Oakland Holdings to arrive, completely unaware that he was already standing right in front of them. The tension in the room was so thick it could be cut with a knife. The deafening silence was broken by a shrill, indignant screech from the dining room. Lucy pushed her way to the front of the stunned crowd, her face contorted with a mixture of severe confusion and visceral disgust. She looked me up and down, her eyes narrowing as her arrogant brain struggled to process my dramatic transformation. "Tobias, what on earth are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. "Are you here to collect the leftover scraps from our dinner? Did you see the police lights and wander over to pick up our trash? You have absolutely no right to step foot in this neighborhood, let alone inside my daughter's magnificent home. Get out before I have the sheriff arrest you for trespassing right now." I did not raise my voice. I did not even look at her immediately. I walked with slow, measured steps directly past the trembling figure of my son and stepped into the grand dining room. The wealthy aunts and uncles instinctively parted, making way for me as I approached the massive custom mahogany table. The $300 organic turkey sat completely ignored on its silver platter, surrounded by half-empty crystal champagne flutes and the chaos of the moving crew rolling up the expensive rugs. Lucy followed me, her face turning an angry shade of crimson as her pristine holiday event crumbled around her. "Did you hear me, you pathetic old man?" she yelled, her composure completely shattering in front of her elite relatives. "This is a private family matter. We are dealing with a massive corporate misunderstanding, and we do not have time for your pathetic charity visits. Get out of my daughter's house before I have you thrown out in handcuffs. I stopped at the head of the table and slowly placed my heavy black leather briefcase onto the polished wood. The sharp click of the brass locks echoed loudly in the tense room. I opened the briefcase and reached inside, pulling out a thick stack of official legal documents printed on heavy watermarked paper. I turned to face Lucy, holding her furious gaze with absolute freezing calm. "I am not here to pick up your trash, Lucy," I said, my voice a low, dangerous rumble that commanded the absolute attention of the entire room. "I am here to throw it out." I tossed the heavy stack of documents directly onto the center of the dining table, right next to her ridiculous, expensive turkey. The papers fanned out perfectly, revealing the massive, bold print of the county registrar. The top document was the master property deed for the Elmwood estate. I tapped my index finger firmly against the prominent signature line at the bottom of the page. "You demanded to speak to the owner of Oakland Holdings, LLC. I announced, my voice carrying the undeniable weight of absolute truth. "You are looking at him. I am Oakland Holdings, and this is my house. You are all currently trespassing on my private property." The sheer magnitude of my declaration hung heavily in the air, suffocating any remaining trace of their elitist vanity. A massive, suffocating shockwave paralyzed the entire room. The wealthy guests, the snobby aunts, and the retired corporate bankers stood completely frozen like marble statues. No one dared to take a single breath. Lucy stared at the official property deed, her mouth opening and closing silently as her arrogant mind violently short-circuited. The realization that she had just openly insulted and mocked the multi-millionaire owner of the very estate she was standing in struck her like a brutal physical blow. She staggered backward, gripping the edge of a dining chair to keep from collapsing entirely. Megan slowly stepped forward, her eyes wide with absolute horror, staring at the undeniable legal documents resting on the mahogany table. She looked from the papers to me and then turned her terrifying gaze toward her husband. Aaron could not withstand the crushing weight of his absolute failure. His knees buckled beneath him and he collapsed onto the polished hardwood floor right in the middle of the grand foyer. He buried his face in his trembling hands, letting out a pathetic, guttural sob that echoed miserably through the silent house. The impenetrable veil of his extravagant lies was violently and permanently stripped away. Every single person in that room now knew the brutal, undeniable truth. Aaron was not a brilliant tech visionary. He was not a self-made millionaire. He was an incredibly weak, desperate fraud who had spent his entire adult life secretly leeching off the very father his in-laws had so cruelly despised. Megan realized in one horrifying instant that her entire luxurious reality was a complete fabrication funded entirely by the black pensioner she had callously uninvited from her Thanksgiving dinner just days prior. The grand, pristine illusion of their high society marriage was completely obliterated, leaving behind nothing but the pathetic sight of a broken man weeping on the floor of a house he never actually owned. The elite relatives who had previously mocked his startup now looked down at him with undisguised pity and extreme revulsion. Aaron had traded his family legacy for their approval, and in the end, he possessed absolutely neither. The heavy, suffocating silence in the grand dining room was violently shattered by the grueling sound of industrial work boots. The professional moving crew, entirely unfazed by the dramatic family revelation or the staggering display of wealth, resumed their duties with ruthless mechanical efficiency. The crew foreman, a large, muscular man with absolutely zero patience for high society theatrics, blew a sharp, short whistle. 4 burly movers marched directly toward the custom mahogany dining table. They did not politely ask the remaining horrified guests to step aside. They did not offer to carefully package the expensive imported food. They simply grabbed the thick, heavily carved legs of the massive dining table. Without a single word of warning, they hoisted the entire piece of furniture straight into the air. The grand holiday feast instantly transformed into a chaotic disaster. The absurdly expensive $300 organic turkey slid violently across the polished wood, crashing onto the expensive Persian rug in a messy explosion of grease and heavy gravy. Delicate crystal champagne flutes shattered against the floor, spilling expensive vintage wine everywhere. Silver platters, fine china, and towering floral centerpieces tumbled to the ground in a cacophony of destruction. Megan shrieked in absolute horror, desperately reaching out as the movers carried the magnificent table straight out the front door. They marched it down the stone walkway and unceremoniously dumped it right onto the freezing front lawn. The remaining food and expensive silverware spilled across the frosted grass, looking like discarded common garbage under the harsh flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers. It was a brutal visual metaphor for their entire fake existence. The sheer indignity of seeing their extravagant holiday feast tossed onto the lawn like trash was the final breaking point for Lucy's elite relatives. The wealthy aunts, uncles, and retired corporate bankers suddenly realized they were standing squarely in the middle of a highly public, humiliating police eviction. The very social standing they guarded so fiercely was rapidly and publicly disintegrating. Without uttering a single word of gratitude or offering any comfort whatsoever to Megan, the high society guests began to flee the premises. They hastily clutched their designer winter coats and practically sprinted toward the grand foyer, stepping right over Aaron, who was still sobbing pathetically on the hardwood floor. They kept their heads down, hiding their faces from the curious wealthy neighbors who were eagerly watching the spectacle from the sidewalks. The sound of luxury car engines roaring to life and speeding away down the street echoed the complete total collapse of Lucy's arrogant kingdom. Within minutes, the sprawling mansion was entirely empty of its affluent audience. Only Lucy, Megan, the police deputies, the moving crew, and my weeping son remained. Lucy's face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. The aristocratic poise she had weaponized against me at the grocery store was entirely gone, replaced by the frantic desperation of a cornered animal. She marched toward me, her hands curled into shaking fists, her chest heaving with toxic fury. "You think you have won, you vindictive, bitter old man?" she spat, her voice trembling with uncontrollable rage. "You think you can just march in here with a piece of paper and destroy my family's reputation? I will sue you for every single penny you possess. I will drag you and your pathetic little shell company through the federal courts until you are left begging on the streets. This is an illegal eviction. We have tenant rights. You cannot do this to us." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of intimidation. I stood incredibly tall, smoothing the lapels of my tailored navy suit, looking down at her with absolute freezing detachment. "You are more than welcome to hire the best lawyers your bankrupt, failing estate can pretend to afford, Lucy," I replied, my voice a smooth, dangerous calm that cut right through her pathetic hysteria. "But before you threaten a man who actually reads the corporate contracts he issues, you might want to understand the legal definition of criminal fraud." I took a slow, deliberate step toward her, forcing her to physically back away. "You see, Lucy, a tenant only has legal rights when they actually pay their rent with their own money. Your brilliant, successful son-in-law has been using my money for 3 years to fund your arrogant, racist illusions. And when my money suddenly dried up, he breached his contract. So go ahead and sue me. I would absolutely love to see you sit on a witness stand and explain to a federal judge how you actively plan to forge medical documents to lock me in a psychiatric facility just to steal my assets. I would love to hear you explain your little coffee shop conversations about drugging a healthy man to steal his private trust fund." Lucy physically recoiled as if she had been struck by a bolt of high-voltage lightning. The color instantly and completely drained from her furious face, leaving her looking pale and terrified. She realized with a horrifying finality that I had heard every single word of her predatory plotting. The audio recordings my private investigator captured were fully in my possession, and she knew it. She opened her mouth to deny it, to spin another web of toxic defensive lies, but her vocal cords completely failed her. She was rendered utterly powerless by the undeniable, crushing truth of her own recorded malice. Just as the heavy weight of my words paralyzed Lucy, the thick mahogany front door swung open once again. The armed police deputies respectfully stepped aside to admit a new commanding figure into the chaotic foyer. It was Jonathan Croft. My powerhouse corporate attorney stepped into the harsh strobe lights looking like a lethal weapon in a custom dark pinstripe suit. He carried a thick black leather briefcase in his right hand, his icy blue eyes sweeping over the pathetic scene with deep professional satisfaction. He took in the sight of Aaron crying helplessly on the floor, Megan trembling in her ruined emerald dress, and Lucy staring at me in absolute stark terror. "Good evening, Tobias," Jonathan said, his deep baritone voice commanding the immediate, unwavering attention of everyone in the room. "I apologize for the slight delay. The holiday traffic was truly abysmal, but I assure you the documents are fully prepared, officially notarized, and ready for immediate execution." "Right on time, Jonathan," I replied, giving him a brief, respectful nod. "The stage is perfectly set." Jonathan walked purposefully toward the center of the grand foyer, placing his black briefcase onto a small decorative side table that the movers had not yet confiscated. The sharp metallic click of the brass lock's opening sounded exactly like the cocking of a loaded firearm. He reached inside and pulled out a massive, meticulously organized binder. This was the financial severance dossier. It was the definitive, legally binding execution of Aaron and Megan's entire fraudulent lifestyle. The time for hiding behind fake tech startups, stolen rent money, and fabricated social statuses is officially over. Jonathan announced, his gaze locking onto Megan with the intensity of a predator cornering its prey. My client has authorized a complete and total financial reckoning. Every single dollar you have spent, every luxury vehicle you have leased, and every extravagant party you have hosted has been meticulously documented and legally severed. The absolute judgment of your financial reality begins right now. Jonathan Croft did not waste a single second on pleasantries. He reached deep into his heavy black leather briefcase and retrieved two incredibly thick, perfectly bound dossiers. He stepped forward, his polished leather shoes echoing sharply against the hardwood floor, and thrust the first dense stack of documents directly into Megan's trembling hands. She took it automatically, her eyes wide with mounting dread. Jonathan then turned his piercing blue gaze toward Lucy. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, lifting her chin in a pathetic final attempt to maintain her shattered aristocratic dignity. She stubbornly refused to reach out and take the folder. Jonathan simply let the heavy document drop onto the small decorative side table right in front of her. The loud slap of the thick paper against the wood made her physically flinch. "I highly recommend you open that file, Lucy," Jonathan stated, his voice dropping to a lethal clinical calm, "because it contains the absolute, undeniable autopsy of your entire fraudulent existence." Aaron remained crumpled on the floor, weeping quietly into his hands, completely incapable of defending his wife or his mother-in-law. I stood silently near the grand staircase, observing the brutal execution of my plan with the cold detachment of a judge overseeing a sentencing. The armed deputies stood by the front door, watching the scene unfold with grim professional interest, while the moving crew temporarily paused their heavy lifting, sensing that a massive explosion was about to occur right in the center of the foyer. Jonathan opened his own master copy of the dossier and adjusted his custom silver cufflinks. "Let us begin with your magnificent housing accommodations," he announced, his voice projecting clearly through the massive empty spaces of the mansion. Over the past 2 years, exactly $120,000 has been wired to cover the exorbitant residential lease of this specific property. Every single one of those monthly payments was quietly authorized and entirely funded by my client, Tobias Jenkins. Megan gasped audibly, her eyes frantically darting down to the pages in her hands. She flipped through the crisp bank statements, seeing the undeniable transfer logs linking Oakland Holdings directly to my private trust. But Jonathan was just getting started. He turned a page, his expression turning even more ruthless. "Next, we have the luxury vehicles. $45,000 in consecutive lease payments for one white Mercedes-Benz SUV and one black Porsche Cayenne." Once again, $0 came from Aaron's supposed tech empire. Every single cent was paid directly from the pockets of the very man you deemed too unrefined to sit at your holiday table. Megan's breathing became shallow and incredibly rapid. She looked down at Aaron, who was still cowering on the floor, unable to meet her furious gaze. "Aaron, you told me you bought those cars," she whispered, her voice cracking under the crushing weight of his absolute deception. "You told me the company paid for them in cash." Jonathan did not give Aaron a chance to formulate a pathetic excuse. He turned another page, slapping his hand flat against the document. "Ah, yes, the famous technology startup, the brilliant enterprise that was supposedly going to make you all multimillionaires. My client, acting as an anonymous angel investor, injected exactly $300,000 of seed capital into that failing, useless company. And instead of building software or hiring engineers, your husband used that massive financial lifeline to rent lavish office spaces, host extravagant launch parties, and buy designer suits to impress you and your arrogant mother." Megan's knees physically buckled. She staggered backward, leaning heavily against the grand staircase to keep from completely collapsing. The realization hit her with the destructive force of a runaway freight train. She had not married a brilliant tech visionary. She had married a broke, desperate, pathetic liar who was entirely dependent on the secret charity of his elderly father. The luxurious, flawless, high society life she had constantly flaunted to her wealthy friends was a complete and total illusion. And the most humiliating, devastating truth of all was that her entire fake aristocratic reality had been solely financed by the exact same black pensioner she had just maliciously banned from her Thanksgiving dinner. The profound, absolute disgust she felt for Aaron radiated from her entire body. She looked at him as if he were a disgusting insect crawling on the expensive hardwood floor. She realized in that exact moment that she possessed absolutely no wealth, no status, and no future. Every single piece of designer furniture she was currently staring at was actively being loaded onto a moving truck because the man she mocked had finally closed his wallet. Lucy, however, violently refused to accept her total defeat. She desperately clawed at the last remaining shreds of her shattered pride. Her face turned a violent shade of purple as she pointed a shaking, furious finger directly at me. "You are a monster, Tobias!" she shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly in the grand foyer. "You orchestrated this entire thing just to publicly humiliate my daughter. You deliberately set them up to fail because you are a bitter, jealous old man who wants to destroy a beautiful family out of pure, vindictive spite. My daughter is an innocent victim of your cruel, manipulative games." Jonathan Croft slowly closed his heavy binder, a dark, predatory smile spreading across his sharp features. "A victim," he repeated the word dripping with heavy, sarcastic venom. "That is a very interesting choice of words, Lucy. Let us see exactly what kind of victim your daughter truly is." Jonathan reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a small, sleek digital audio player. He pressed a button, syncing it immediately to the massive high-definition Bluetooth speakers Aaron had installed in the living room ceiling. Jonathan pressed play. The pristine, crystal-clear audio of the quiet cafe filled the entire house, echoing loudly off the high-vaulted ceilings. The police deputies by the door instantly straightened their posture, their hands instinctively resting on their utility belts as they listened. Lucy's own voice came blaring through the speakers, cold and heavily laced with malicious ambition. "We force his hand, darling. We can easily manipulate Aaron into believing his father is suffering from severe early-onset dementia. We start hiding Tobias's things when we visit. We gaslight him." The color violently and completely drained from Lucy's face. She opened her mouth in a silent scream of absolute terror. Then Megan's voice echoed from the overhead speakers, dripping with toxic greed. "We convince Aaron to get his father to sign a full medical and financial power of attorney. Once we have the legal authority, we toss the old man into one of those cheap state-run nursing facilities. They drug them up so much in those places he will not even know his own name. Then we legally liquidate his house and drain the trust." The audio recording stopped, leaving a heavy, deadly silence in its wake. The moving crew stared at the two women with open, undisguised disgust. The police deputies glared at Lucy and Megan, their professional demeanor shifting into absolute contempt for the two predators standing in front of them. The audio file was not just a humiliating public exposure of their fake morality. It was undeniable concrete evidence of a premeditated criminal conspiracy to commit severe elder abuse and massive financial fraud. Every single desperate excuse, every pathetic lie, and every shred of their false victimhood was instantly and permanently incinerated. They were completely exposed as ruthless, calculating criminals who preyed on the elderly. Lucy stood completely paralyzed, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, but absolutely no sound came out. Megan slid slowly down the wall of the staircase, sinking to the floor, completely crushed by the undeniable reality that they had just engineered their own absolute and total destruction. There was nowhere left to run, and no one left to blame. The crushing silence following the audio recording shattered in the most violent way imaginable. The toxic alliance that had bound Lucy and Megan together in their parasitic scheme instantly imploded. Lucy, realizing the sheer legal and social peril she was now facing, did what she always did. She frantically looked for a scapegoat to sacrifice to save her own skin. Her face contorted with panicked rage as she spun around and delivered a vicious, ringing slap directly across Megan's cheek. The sharp, brutal crack echoed loudly through the grand foyer. "You stupid, incompetent girl," Lucy shrieked, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "I told you this was a massive mistake. I told you Aaron was a useless fraud, and you dragged me into this miserable criminal conspiracy. I will not go to a federal prison because you married a pathetic loser." Megan stumbled backward, clutching her stinging red cheek, her eyes wide with shock and absolute hatred. Her own mother had just thrown her directly to the wolves to save her own miserable life. Completely stripped of her wealth, her fake upper-class status, and now her family loyalty, Megan completely lost her mind. She let out a guttural, terrifying scream and lunged not at her mother, but directly at Aaron. She threw herself onto the floor where he was still cowering, her acrylic nails violently scratching and clawing at his face and his expensive silk shirt. "You ruined my entire life," she roared, tearing at his collar and striking his chest with clenched fists. "You lied to me. You promised me millions. You are nothing but a broke, pathetic liar." The armed deputies immediately stepped forward, grabbing Megan by her arms and forcefully dragging her off the weeping, bleeding man. She thrashed wildly in their tight grip, her beautiful emerald dress tearing at the seam, creating a perfect visual representation of her entirely destroyed reality. Aaron scrambled backward across the polished hardwood floor, terrified and bleeding from the deep red scratches on his cheek. His expensive custom-tailored suit was completely ruined, his designer tie ripped and hanging loosely around his neck. He looked at the armed police deputies restraining his frantic, screaming wife, then at Lucy, who was actively backing away toward the front door to physically distance herself from the massive legal fallout. He realized with horrifying clarity that he was completely and utterly alone. He had absolutely no money, no powerful allies, and no fake tech empire to hide behind anymore. His panicked, desperate eyes finally locked onto me. The very father he had casually discarded and actively plotted to lock away in a chemical prison was his absolute last remaining lifeline. Aaron scrambled forward on his hands and knees, crawling rapidly across the floor like a pathetic, broken child. He reached my polished leather Oxford shoes and threw his arms tightly around my legs, burying his tear-streaked face against the fabric of my trousers. "Dad, please," he sobbed uncontrollably, his voice a miserable, high-pitched whine. "Please, you have to help me. I am so sorry. I was totally out of my mind. I never wanted to hurt you. They made me do it." He pointed a trembling accusatory finger directly at Megan and Lucy, completely throwing his wife and mother-in-law under the bus without a single second of hesitation. "It was their idea, Dad. They manipulated me from the very beginning. Lucy was constantly threatening to make Megan divorce me if I did not provide them with a massive luxury lifestyle. They completely brainwashed me into going along with the medical power of attorney scheme. I never actually wanted to put you in a facility. I swear on my life, I was just so desperate and terrified of losing my marriage." Aaron clung to my legs even tighter, his hot tears soaking into my trousers, his cowardly confession echoing loudly in the grand foyer for everyone to hear. "I just wanted to make you proud of me, Dad," he wept, his voice dripping with pure toxic manipulation. "I wanted to be a highly successful businessman just like you. I wanted to build a massive legacy. But the tech startup was bleeding cash, and the angel investors pulled out without warning. I was completely in over my head, and the consumer debt just kept piling up. I was drowning and I did not know how to swim. I was too ashamed to tell you the truth. I am your only son. You are my flesh and blood. Please, Dad, I am begging you on my knees. Give me one more chance. Give me a chance to make things right. I will divorce Megan right now. I will cut them entirely out of my life. Just please do not leave me out on the freezing street. I will do whatever you want. I will work for you in the warehouses. I will pay back every single dollar I owe you. Just do not sever my inheritance. Do not let me lose absolutely everything." He pressed his forehead against my shoes, sobbing hysterically, waiting for the familiar, comforting hand of his father to rest on his shoulder. He was waiting for the magical safety net to catch him, just as it had done 1,000 times before. He genuinely believed that beneath my cold exterior, the soft, forgiving heart of a parent would ultimately cave to his pathetic, miserable tears. I did not reach down to comfort him. I did not place a forgiving hand on his shaking shoulder or offer a single word of paternal reassurance. I stood completely rigid, staring down at the weeping, pathetic man clutching my legs with absolute freezing detachment. I slowly reached into the inner breast pocket of my tailored navy suit jacket. My fingers closed around a heavy, solid object. I pulled my hand out and held the item up in the harsh flashing lights of the police cruisers illuminating the grand foyer. Dangling from a thick, polished gold chain was my grandfather's antique pocket watch. The very same sacred family heirloom Aaron had stolen from my shattered display case just a few short hours ago. I had driven directly to the county precinct right after the luxury pawn shop flagged the transaction, and the sheriff had personally handed the stolen property back to me before orchestrating this massive eviction. Aaron slowly looked up from my polished shoes. The moment his tear-filled eyes locked onto the gleaming gold watch swinging gently like a pendulum, his breath hitched violently in his throat. He instantly released my legs and scrambled backward, his face turning an impossible shade of ash white. The absolute finality of his horrific actions crashed down upon him like a concrete wall. He realized I knew absolutely everything. Every single betrayal, every stolen dollar, every violated boundary. I looked down at him with a gaze completely stripped of any remaining affection. "You did not just steal my money, Aaron," I said, my voice resonating with cold, lethal authority that silenced the entire room. "You broke into my home and sold our sacred family legacy. You pawned the blood and sweat of your own ancestors just to buy a fake, pathetic Thanksgiving dinner for people who openly despise the very color of your skin. You traded your birthright for an illusion." Aaron opened his mouth to beg to formulate another miserable excuse, but I raised my hand, silencing him instantly. "Your mother spent her entire life trying to raise an honorable man," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute finality. "I will not allow you to disgrace her memory or my legacy for a single second longer. You sold our family's legacy to buy a fake Thanksgiving. I have no such son. You are nothing to me now. Pack your garbage and get off my property." The county sheriff did not need to hear another word from me or anyone else. He signaled his deputies with a sharp, authoritative nod. Two burly officers stepped forward, grabbing Aaron by the arms and hoisting him to his feet. Aaron was dead weight, sobbing uncontrollably and begging for a second chance, but they marched him toward the front door without a single shred of sympathy. Megan, still clutching the torn fabric of her ruined emerald dress, tried to violently resist the officers. A female deputy placed a firm, unyielding hand on her shoulder, guiding her forcefully out of the grand foyer and warning her that any further resistance would result in immediate arrest. Lucy, completely stripped of all her haughty upper-class pride, stumbled backward. Her designer heels clicked frantically against the hardwood floor as the deputies herded them all onto the freezing front porch. The moving crew worked with ruthless speed, carrying out the last few boxes of their personal belongings and dumping them unceremoniously onto the frosted grass alongside the ruined $300 turkey and the shattered crystal glasses. I stood in the center of the grand foyer, watching the pathetic trio shivering in the bitter November air. Jonathan Croft stood right beside me, his heavy briefcase securely fastened, offering a grim, highly satisfied smile. The sheriff stepped back inside, offering me a respectful salute before stepping out onto the porch to join his men. With a heavy, resonant thud, the massive custom mahogany door slammed shut. The brass deadbolt clicked firmly into place, echoing loudly through the massive, empty mansion. The absolute silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had heard in years. The toxic parasites had been completely excised from my life and my property. I was standing alone in the grand entryway, but for the first time in decades, I felt entirely free. Outside the sprawling estate, the biting winter wind whipped aggressively through the dark neighborhood. A light dusting of snow had begun to fall, sticking to the velvet lapels of Lucy's expensive winter coat and ruining Megan's perfect salon blowout. They stood on the concrete sidewalk, surrounded by a chaotic mountain of cardboard boxes, trash bags filled with designer clothes, and the greasy remnants of their extravagant feast. Aaron sat heavily on a sealed moving box, staring blankly at the pavement, entirely broken and completely mute. Lucy, shivering violently in the freezing temperature, pulled out her smartphone. Her fingers, adorned with cheap cubic zirconia rings, shook as she frantically dialed the numbers of the wealthy aunts, uncles, and corporate bankers who had just fled the mansion minutes prior. She called her older brother Richard first, fully expecting him to send his private driver to rescue them from this nightmare. The call went straight to voicemail. She dialed her sister, demanding a guest room for the night. Her sister answered awkwardly, mumbled a terrible excuse about a sudden plumbing emergency, and promptly hung up the phone. Call after call, the absolute reality of high society loyalty revealed itself. The very moment their wealth and status evaporated, they became total pariahs. Not a single person from their elite racist circle was willing to associate with a family currently sitting on a curb alongside a glaring police cruiser. Megan watched her mother's desperate attempts fail one by one, and her rage reignited. She paced back and forth, screaming at the dark sky, cursing the wealthy neighborhood, and violently kicking a cardboard box full of Aaron's useless tech startup brochures. With their luxury vehicles officially repossessed and their credit cards entirely maxed out, they had absolutely no way to transport their belongings. Aaron, functioning purely on autopilot, pulled out his phone and requested 2 standard rideshare vehicles. When the cheap dented sedans finally arrived, the drivers looked at the mountain of boxes and the ruined designer clothes in absolute disbelief. The sheer humiliation of begging the drivers to help them load black trash bags into the cramped trunks was a crushing blow to Megan and Lucy's fragile, massive egos. They crammed themselves into the back seats, the smell of cheap air freshener and stale fast food replacing their expensive floral perfumes. Aaron sat in the front passenger seat, completely avoiding the driver's gaze. They could not afford a luxury hotel downtown. They did not even have the funds for a standard chain hotel. Aaron directed the drivers to a rundown, dilapidated motel on the absolute outskirts of the city, a place surrounded by flickering neon signs and cracked asphalt. The night manager, sitting behind a thick sheet of bulletproof glass, demanded cash up front for the room. Aaron had to beg Lucy to pawn one of her fake rings the next morning just to cover a single room with 2 double beds for the week. The wealthy, arrogant family that had just hosted an exclusive, pristine Thanksgiving gathering was now dragging black garbage bags up a filthy concrete stairwell, shivering in the freezing cold and locking themselves inside a room that smelled strongly of stale cigarette smoke and cheap bleach. 1 full month passed since that glorious Thanksgiving evening. The deep winter chill had fully settled over the city, but inside my modest wooden home, the atmosphere was incredibly warm and peaceful. I spent my days reading, enjoying simple meals with my veteran friends, and managing the vast charitable operations of Oakland Holdings. I did not receive a single phone call from Aaron, Megan, or Lucy. The toxic noise that had plagued my life for years was entirely gone. I was sitting comfortably by the fireplace, drinking a hot cup of black coffee and reviewing a scholarship application for a brilliant young engineering student when a sharp, aggressive knock at my front door broke the tranquil silence. I set my mug down and walked to the foyer, expecting a delivery driver. I opened the door to find a stern-looking man in a plain beige suit holding a thick manila envelope. He asked if I was Tobias Jenkins, and I nodded. He thrust the envelope into my hands, stated that I had been officially served, and walked briskly back to his unmarked vehicle. I closed the door, a familiar sense of cold annoyance creeping into my chest. I walked back to my armchair and tore the heavy envelope open. Inside was a formal court summons. I scanned the dense legal jargon, my eyes narrowing as I processed the sheer unrelenting audacity of the document. Aaron and Megan were officially suing me in civil court. Despite being exposed as massive frauds, despite the stolen antique watch and their malicious nursing home plot, their bottomless greed compelled them to strike one final desperate time. Their bottom-feeding lawyer had filed a massive civil claim demanding millions of dollars in continuous damages. The legal basis of their ridiculous lawsuit was a fabricated concept called financial dependency and expectation of inheritance. They were audaciously claiming that by secretly funding their lavish lifestyle for 3 years, I had intentionally created an artificial standard of living that they were now completely dependent upon. They argued that my abrupt, malicious withdrawal of financial support caused severe emotional distress and catastrophic economic ruin. They wanted a judge to force me to pay for the rest of their miserable lives. I did not panic. I did not feel a single ounce of fear. I reached for my phone and dialed Jonathan Croft. They wanted to drag me into a courtroom. They had absolutely no idea that a federal courtroom was my absolute favorite place to completely and permanently destroy an enemy. The heavy oak doors of the federal civil courthouse swung open, and I walked down the center aisle with the calm, steady pace of a man who held every single winning card. The courtroom was an imposing chamber of polished mahogany and cold marble designed to intimidate the weak and validate the powerful. I took my seat at the defense table next to Jonathan Croft, who was meticulously organizing his flawless legal files. Across the aisle, sitting at the plaintiff table, was Aaron, Megan, and their bottom-feeding contingency lawyer, Mr. Vance. They looked absolutely pathetic. Aaron was wearing a cheap, poorly fitted suit, a stark contrast to the custom-tailored Italian wool he used to flaunt when I was secretly paying his bills. Megan looked exhausted, her roots showing her posture slumped, and her face devoid of the arrogant aristocratic pride she once weaponized against me. Lucy was not even present, having likely completely abandoned her daughter to distance herself from the mounting legal bills. Presiding over the chamber was the Honorable Judge Marcus Sterling, a highly respected, stern black man with a legendary reputation for possessing absolutely zero tolerance for frivolous litigation or courtroom theatrics. He adjusted his glasses and signaled for the plaintiffs to begin their opening statement. Mr. Vance stood up, buttoning his cheap jacket, and launched into the most ridiculous, legally absurd argument I had ever heard in my entire life. He paced back and forth, pointing a dramatic, accusing finger directly at me. "Your Honor," he proclaimed, his voice dripping with manufactured outrage, "my clients are the tragic victims of a malicious and calculated financial grooming process. For 3 years, the defendant intentionally and secretly funded their lavish lifestyle, creating a profound artificial standard of living. He fostered a deep psychological and economic dependency, only to maliciously and abruptly sever that support, causing my clients catastrophic emotional distress and complete financial ruin. He argued that by acting as a silent angel investor and covering their residential leases, I had established a binding, unspoken contract of continuous support. He demanded millions of dollars in punitive damages, claiming I had ruined Aaron's promising tech career and destroyed Megan's social standing out of pure vindictive spite. I did not blink. I did not show a single ounce of anger or amusement. I simply sat back in my chair and watched Judge Sterling. The judge stared down at Mr. Vance from the high bench, his expression completely flat, utterly unimpressed by the shameless display of unadulterated entitlement. When Mr. Vance finally finished his ridiculous monologue and took his seat, Jonathan Croft stood up. He did not pace. He did not raise his voice. He simply buttoned his custom pinstripe suit, picked up a single manila folder, and approached the podium with the lethal precision of a corporate assassin. "Your Honor." Jonathan began, his deep baritone voice commanding absolute authority. "My opposing counsel has painted a truly touching portrait of financial victimhood. However, he conveniently omitted the actual reason my client severed his extreme generosity. My client did not cut off funding out of malice. He cut it off because he discovered he was funding a nest of vipers actively plotting to destroy his life." Jonathan opened the folder and withdrew a certified police report. "Exhibit A, Your Honor. The official confiscation report from the county sheriff department. Just hours before the eviction, the plaintiff, Aaron Jenkins, broke into my client's home and shattered a secure display case. He stole a solid gold antique pocket watch to pawn for quick cash to fund a luxury holiday dinner." Jonathan turned slowly to look directly at Aaron, whose face had just drained of all remaining color. "But this was not just any watch, Your Honor. This watch was purchased by my client's grandfather with his very first wages as a freedman after surviving the brutal horrors of the cotton fields. It is a sacred, priceless symbol of this family's survival and heritage, and the plaintiff stole it to buy expensive wine to impress a family that openly mocks his very existence." The atmosphere in the courtroom instantly plummeted below freezing. Judge Sterling's eyes narrowed dangerously. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the heavy wooden bench, his piercing gaze locking directly onto Aaron. The cultural and moral weight of a son selling out his own ancestors' freedom just to appease a racist, superficial aesthetic hit the judge with profound, undeniable force. The utter disgust radiating from the bench was palpable. Aaron shrank down in his chair, physically trying to hide from the judge's scorching contempt. But Jonathan Croft was not even close to being finished. He pulled a second document and a small black USB drive from his folder. If the theft of a sacred family heirloom is not enough to justify cutting off financial support, Your Honor, let us move to Exhibit B. This is an authenticated audio transcript captured by a licensed private investigator. It details a conversation between the plaintiff Megan Jenkins and her mother Lucy. Jonathan read the transcript aloud, enunciating every single toxic word with brutal clarity. They explicitly outline a premeditated criminal conspiracy to forge medical documents, gaslight my client into believing he has severe dementia, and trick him into signing a medical power of attorney. Their stated end goal, Your Honor, was to lock my client in a state-run psychiatric facility, heavily drug him, and completely liquidate his multi-million-dollar private trust to save themselves from their own massive consumer debt. Megan buried her face in her hands, letting out a muffled, pathetic sob as her own malicious words were read into the official federal court record. Mr. Vance jumped up from his chair, frantically objecting and stammering about privacy laws and inadmissible recordings, but Judge Sterling slammed his heavy wooden gavel down with the force of a gunshot. Overruled. The judge bellowed, his powerful voice echoing off the marble walls and silencing the sleazy lawyer instantly. Sit down, Mr. Vance, before I hold you in contempt of this court. Judge Sterling took off his glasses and looked down at the plaintiff table. His expression was a terrifying mask of righteous absolute fury. He stared at Aaron with a level of profound disappointment and intense revulsion that words could barely capture. I have sat on this bench for 22 years. Judge Sterling began, his voice trembling slightly with contained rage. I have presided over complex corporate fraud, violent organized crime, and deep systemic corruption. But I have rarely witnessed a display of entitlement greed and sheer moral bankruptcy quite as sickening as what is sitting in front of me today. The judge pointed a firm, commanding finger directly at Aaron. You stood before this court and had the unmitigated audacity to claim victimhood because your father finally stopped allowing you to leech off the fortune he built with his own blood and sweat. You stole the very symbol of your own grandfather's emancipation to buy the approval of people who view you as nothing more than a convenient, disposable wallet. You are a disgrace to your heritage and a profound disappointment to the man who gave you everything. Judge Sterling shifted his glaring eyes to Megan, who was openly weeping in her chair. And you, madam, conspired to lock an innocent, healthy man in a chemical prison simply because you could not afford to maintain your pathetic artificial social status. The fact that you are not currently facing federal criminal charges for conspiracy to commit elder abuse is a testament solely to Mr. Jenkins's remarkable restraint. The judge grabbed his gavel, his jaw tightly clenched. This lawsuit is a grotesque, disgusting abuse of the judicial system. It is completely, entirely, and permanently dismissed with extreme prejudice. But the execution was not over. Judge Sterling leaned over the bench, delivering the final devastating blow. Furthermore, I am invoking the maximum allowable sanctions for frivolous and malicious litigation. The plaintiffs, Aaron and Megan Jenkins, are hereby ordered to pay 100% of the defendant's legal fees and all associated court costs, effective immediately. The heavy wooden gavel slammed down a second time, sealing their absolute destruction. Aaron's head dropped onto the plaintiff table as he let out a loud, miserable groan of pure defeat. He knew exactly what kind of attorney Jonathan Croft was. He knew that the legal fees for a powerhouse corporate defense firm running a federal civil case would easily amount to hundreds of thousands of dollars. They were already drowning in unpaid rent, broken car leases, and massive credit card debt. This ruling was an absolute, inescapable financial death sentence. It was the final nail in the coffin, pushing them directly into the dark, suffocating abyss of total bankruptcy. They had gambled everything on one last greedy attempt to steal my money, and they had lost absolutely everything. I stood up calmly, buttoned my tailored navy jacket, and walked out of the courtroom with Jonathan Croft by my side, leaving my son and his wife to drown in the miserable, inescapable wreckage of their own making. It has been exactly 1 year since the heavy wooden gavel fell in that federal courtroom, completely obliterating the pathetic facade of Aaron and Megan Jenkins. The crushing weight of Jonathan Croft's massive legal fees, combined with a suffocating mountain of consumer debt and severely broken luxury leases, forced them into a devastating Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Their pristine $2 million suburban estate is a distant memory. Now they live in a cramped, damp, one-bedroom apartment in an industrial neighborhood they previously would not have dared to drive through. I parked my reliable sedan across the street from a rundown strip mall on a dreary, freezing Tuesday afternoon. Through the rain-slicked windshield, I watched a battered white delivery van pull up to the cracked curb. Aaron stepped out into the freezing slush. The custom-tailored Italian wool suits he used to flaunt were permanently gone, replaced by a cheap, ill-fitting polyester uniform, deeply stained with sweat and motor grease. He looked at least 10 years older, his shoulders heavily hunched as he carried a massive stack of heavy cardboard boxes toward a discount appliance store. He was running ragged, working exhausting double shifts just to make the minimum payments on the few remaining debts that survived the brutal bankruptcy slaughter. Inside the adjacent discount grocery store, Megan stood behind a scratched plexiglass checkout counter. She wore a faded green smock, her once perfect blown-out hair pulled back into a messy, uneven knot. A frustrated customer angrily shoved a crumpled coupon in her face, and Megan simply took it with a miserable, defeated expression entirely devoid of her former aristocratic arrogance. There was no more imported French wine or $300 organic turkeys. Her mother, Lucy, had completely disowned her the very second the bankruptcy proceedings became public record. Lucy cut off all contact legally and socially, abandoning her own daughter to save whatever tiny shred of her fake high society status remained. They were completely isolated, trapped in a miserable, grinding poverty they had brought entirely upon themselves. I sat in the driver's seat of my warm car, watching my son violently wipe the freezing rain from his exhausted face as he struggled with a rusted delivery dolly. For a fleeting fraction of a second, a small instinctual part of me remembered the bright little boy I used to carry proudly on my shoulders. But that nostalgic memory was instantly and permanently overshadowed by the stark image of him smashing my grandfather's sacred display case and actively plotting to lock me in a chemical prison. I did not roll down the window. I did not step out of the car to offer him a single dollar of comfort or a single word of paternal forgiveness. I felt absolutely nothing for the broken man standing in the freezing rain. They had made their arrogant choices, and now they had to live with the brutal, uncompromising consequences of their malice. I smoothly shifted my car into drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving them entirely in my rearview mirror. I never looked back. Exactly 2 weeks later, I stood under the bright, warm morning sun on the sprawling historic campus of a prestigious, historically black university. The brass band played a triumphant, uplifting melody as hundreds of bright, eager students gathered around a massive, newly constructed brick building. I stood at the top of the white marble steps holding a pair of large ceremonial golden scissors. Right above the heavy oak double doors, a gleaming bronze plaque read, "The Camille Jenkins Center for Innovation and Engineering." I had completely liquidated Aaron's $15 million trust fund and poured every single penny into building this magnificent state-of-the-art facility. I looked out at the beautiful crowd of brilliant, ambitious young men and women of color who would actually use this wealth to build real, tangible legacies. I smiled warmly, snipped the thick red ribbon, and listened to the deafening roar of applause. As I walked through the bright modern corridors of the new engineering center, I felt an overwhelming, profound sense of absolute peace. The toxic, chaotic noise that had polluted my life for years was entirely extinguished. I had successfully protected the sacred legacy of my ancestors and honored the beautiful, enduring memory of my late wife. I did not let my blind parental love for an ungrateful son destroy the massive empire I bled to build from the ground up. True wealth is never measured in luxury car leases, custom mahogany dining tables, or exclusive country club memberships. True wealth is the absolute freedom to dictate exactly how your life is lived and who is privileged enough to be a part of it. Aaron and Megan learned the hardest, most unforgiving lesson a person can ever learn in this world. They confused silent generosity with foolish weakness. They thought they could easily manipulate an old man, steal his hard-earned fortune, and use his money to fund their pathetic racist illusions of high society grandeur. They underestimated my intelligence, my ruthlessness, and my absolute refusal to be a victim in my own story. They wanted Thanksgiving to be just family. I gave them exactly what they asked for. The only problem was, they never realized who owned the table they were sitting at. The greatest lesson I learned from this entire ordeal is that blood does not automatically grant someone a blank check to your soul or your hard-earned resources. Society constantly tells us that family is an unbreakable bond demanding endless forgiveness and infinite financial sacrifice. But when that sacred bond is maliciously weaponized against you, it is no longer love. It is a hostage situation. Setting firm boundaries even when it completely breaks your own heart is the ultimate form of self-preservation and self-respect. You must never set yourself on fire simply to keep ungrateful, toxic people warm. Let my journey be a firm warning to anyone enduring abuse just because it comes from a relative. If you found value in my story of reclaiming my dignity, please leave a comment below sharing your own experiences, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more stories of surviving toxic family dynamics.